and prospects under FCTA. The training, which is slated to conclude by end of this month, will be followed from the same lady. We'll pick out 40 selected women-led enterprises, Your Excellency. And allow me very quickly share with you lessons learned during our ongoing training and sensation within private sector with the overall FTA strategy. Here I would say that the women-led mission is slated to come to West Africa, and Your Excellency, if that's okay, we'll be more than happy to call on you at your office in Accra, if you come to Accra. So please put us in your program. When we call on you, we'd like very much to visit the Secretariat. Your Excellency, what we have been able to gather from the trainings, number one, is the FCTA will undoubtedly enable our private sector, particularly the SMEs, the women, to enjoy several merits that come with economic inclusion. Number two, for many years, our cultural norms have discriminated against women, both in the business employment. But thanks to FCTA strategy, all that unfairness is bound to change. Thank you. Number three, UNC intends to initiate and open many cross-border frontiers in our continuing efforts to create awareness about FCTA. We still have a long way to go. Mainly in women entrepreneurship, that is our main focus. We are also focusing on the enhancement of women's access to funding opportunities, mainly for both women and men SMEs. We all agree that most of our economies is made of SMEs, but finance, affordable finance continues to be a challenge to all of us. When I say to people that in Uganda we're all SMEs, people say, no, you're not all SMEs. My view, we're all SMEs. Unless you're talking about the multinationals, where we don't belong. But if you're talking about the base of our economy, the base of the economies in the West African countries, is the SMEs that actually support our economies. So that's why our focus is on SMEs, particularly the women. And of course, the financing is a big problem. Being a private sector body, Chamber of Commerce partners very well with the government and support private sector enterprise development. Honorable Minister, we thank your support, Honorable Mwebesa and your team, and we intend to continue strengthening and nurturing this collaboration and partnerships. We have gladly discovered that FCTA, as we engage with our people, it actually influences local traders to think about diversing their markets and products in order to attain clear leverage for trading and FCTA. There is, however, also pressing need for training and capacity building programs targeting importers, exporters, mostly women-led SMEs, especially in these infant and delicate stages of CTA. Your Excellency, all the above having said, it's worth noting that Uganda's comparative advantage of priority goods for exports within priority markets, that's where our biggest market is Africa, particularly in the region. And there is coffee, sugar, maize, and many others. Our biggest importers are Kenya, which imports up to 11.2%. Southern Sudan is 8.6%. Congo DRC, 6.43%. Tanzania is 2.29%. And Sudan, 2.16%. In addition to those for which Uganda could have a significant comparative advantage, the goods that Uganda have also listed as priorities for trade within the FCTA market include gold and gold components. I think that will be presented in our position paper that we have put together as private sector. There is also agriculture products, fish, manufactured goods like steel, timber, flowers, and ore, and others. Particularly regarding coffee, it is worth mentioning that while Uganda has traditionally sat behind Ethiopia in terms of volumes, and both Kenya and Rwanda in terms of quality, the stats today and topographic landscape is shifting, with Uganda being on the track of quantitatively and qualitatively becoming the coffee king in East Africa and on the continent. So we're looking forward to trading with the other African countries. Nigeria, for example, one of the biggest on the continent, South Africa and many others, would want to see our coffee, before we take it anywhere, we share it with our brothers and sisters. Your Excellency, Uganda's exports are highly regionalized, with Africa making up to 52% of Uganda's total value of goods exported. Much of Uganda's exports are concentrated within East African market, that is 41% of our total exports, 8 only within the commercial region, and all the rest to the rest of the world. Both EAC and COMESA are regional economic communities already under the umbrella of the Continental Free Trade Area. Therefore, FTA presents a promising offer of continued wide commercial market access for Uganda farms to significantly expand their export to new markets. However, to fully expand their exports to new markets, these opportunities, it would be necessary for Uganda to strategically evaluate new product and market opportunities, bearing in mind that FCTA brings in opportunities that also come with increased competition. For Uganda exporters, particularly within AC, please put up your socks, improve on your quality, improve on your branding. There is going to be competition when time comes. Ultimately, let me assure you of our greatest commitment to excellency and unwavering dedication to FCTA and the strong Pan-African ideal it stands for. Uganda Chamber of Commerce and Industry will continue aspiring to complementing, supporting, and championing the FCTA, not only within our borders, but also in collaboration with other chambers in East Africa region and on the continent as a whole. We'll nevertheless seek to establish acquaintance, collaboration, partnership with the FCTA Secretariat itself as we jointly work towards achieving the Africa that we want. On behalf of private sector and the very business community, I would like to take this opportunity to call upon our political leaders, Honorable Mwebesa and your colleagues, to fast track the non-tariff barriers that hinder the progress of private sector. I know a lot has been done. I know that Uganda is fine-tuning its policy, but we want more, Honorable Minister. We want to see those challenges that challenge us to drive actively and participate commercially to benefit from the intra-regional market within East Africa region, but also in the wider international market that is being held by the FTA on the African continent as a whole. With those few words, I want to thank you for listening to me. We'll be listening to a presentation that we put together where the private sector that will be presented by one of us. So I thank you for listening to me. Well, thank you.
I think a bigger round of applause for those opening remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, in a short while, I'll be inviting the CEO PSFU to come and give us his remarks. But for now, I'm going to ask us just to turn our eyes to the screens and just watch a little video that we've prepared showing the different opportunities at hand. If we can cue that video now.
Uganda, a land of untapped beauty and endless opportunity. Under the visionary leadership of President Yoweri Museveni, Uganda has undergone a remarkable transformation, and today it has become a hub of innovation that is ready for investment. And at the forefront of this business renaissance stands the Ugandan National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. UNCCI is the heartbeat of Uganda's private sector, with almost a century of unwavering commitment to empowering its members and driving economic growth. Through its 5 pillars of promoting economic growth with an emphasis on value addition, UNCCI has created a vibrant and dynamic business ecosystem in Uganda. Uganda is more than just a destination for business opportunities. It's a melting pot of cultures and home to some of the most hospitable people on earth. You will experience firsthand the kindness and generosity of Ugandans, both in business and in everyday life. Whether you are a small or medium-sized enterprise looking to scale up, a multinational corporation seeking new markets, or an investor seeking high returns and positive impact, Uganda and UNCCI have something for you. With its diverse range of sectors, including agriculture, innovation, and with the recent discovery of oil, the country's economic potential is only set to grow. As an active participant in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Uganda is at the forefront of Africa's economic integration. Located in the heart of East Africa, Uganda shares the largest strategic border, providing easy access to regional markets with a massive population of about 520 million people through its well-developed transport and communication networks. From the towering peaks of the Rwenzori Mountains to the pristine wilderness of Bwindi Impenetrable National Park, home to over 50% of the world's mountain gorilla that call Uganda home, Uganda boasts of breathtaking natural wonders such as the Nile River, Lake Victoria, and a rich diversity of wildlife. This East African nation has emerged as a sought-after tourist destination thanks to unparalleled attractions such as the tree-climbing lions of Ishasha, the rare species of chimpanzees and elephants that roam the Queen Elizabeth Gorge. Lake Bunyonyi and the Kazinga Channel boast of an abundance of rare bird species that even rival the famed Amazon forest. The markets of Uganda are a feast for the senses, with vibrant colors, delicious smells, and a friendly hustle-bustle. It's a place where you can taste the flavors of Africa and experience the rich culture and traditions of its people. By investing in Uganda, you are not just investing in a country. You are investing in the dreams and aspirations of the people who call Uganda home and their neighboring countries. Come and experience the beauty and potential of Uganda for yourself and let UNCCI be your guide. Uganda, the pearl of Africa.
I thought you'd be patriotic and at least give a round of applause indeed for Uganda, the pearl of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm going to ask us just to put our hands together for Mr. Stephen
Uganda, a land
CEO of PSFU, as he comes to give us his remarks, and then I'll guide us a little later on how our program flow is.
Thank you very much, Mr. MC. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. This is SCFTA, so we have to be a bit more vibrant. Good afternoon, SCFTA. Thank you, that's better. Our distinguished guest, the Secretary General, SCFTA, His Excellency, Mr. Wamkele Mene, you're most welcome to Uganda. Our Minister for Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, Honorable Francis Mwebesa, our State Minister for Trade, Honorable Ngobi Gume, our country representative, UNDP, thank you very much, and our sponsor, by the way, for this event, dear sister, thank you very much. The President of the Chamber of Commerce, who's just spoken, Madam Olive Chigongo, Executive Director of UMA, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in a very special way, I would like to recognize the Board of Private Sector Foundation. I think our board members are here. If you could stand for recognition. Board members, we are here in a big way. Thank you very much for coming. Our brothers and sisters from the UMA and other sister business agencies, the media, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Olive, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, covered pretty much a big chunk of my speech. And I know there are many speakers ahead of me, so I'll skip a couple of things that were mentioned just so that, but I'll leave for emphasis those areas. We also have a document that is basically a statement from the private sector we put together. So I'll skip a lot of the SCFTA issues in broad terms, but I'll just put in emphasis from a PSFU perspective. So, Your Excellency, the PSFU is the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. It's an umbrella body that brings together pretty much business associations, corporate companies, and some agencies from different parts of the private sector growth. We play a very important role alongside the Chamber of Commerce, and part of our responsibility is to also work together with sister business associations across East Africa. We are the focal point for the COMESA Business Council, and because of the SCFTA with other business associations, we have jumped into the deep end of the SCFTA to ensure that we grow this very, very important initiative. Your Excellency, we also, with government and many multilateral organizations, we partner with them on strengthening a lot of the private sector across the country. We're now expanding much further. You may wish to know, Your Excellency, that Uganda has the youngest population in the world. As a matter of fact, 75% of our population is people the age of 35 years. And this for us is both a challenge but a very good opportunity. So as PSFU, working with government and the international development partners, we are working closely. But we do this in strategic ways. And one of them is research and advocacy, and pushing for policy issues to ensure that we create an enabling environment. Now, why that's important is that when the SCFTA was launched a couple of years ago, we decided to create a special purpose vehicle to go to the countryside and see how do we effectively and efficiently take advantage of this opportunity. So on a weekly basis, you will see us in Parliament with the executive and different players across the country to ensure that we infuse this opportunity called SCFTA into our framework of doing business. And we do this almost on a daily basis, creating this dialogue, reviewing business legislation, trying to enter some of the critical regulatory frameworks. And recently, with the support of the UNDP, we went full throttle to ensure that we create an export-ready environment, especially for small and medium enterprises. So this is very important. We are doing this in tandem with the Chamber of Commerce and other business associations to ensure that our members be part of this. And against this background, I would like us to put our hands together to the UNDP, which was responsible, and specifically LC, for that framework. But alongside that, we work with the World Bank, with the EU, and recently, a couple of years ago, with the MasterCard Foundation, and I'll talk about that in a bit, to ensure that this becomes critical. I must commend you, Your Excellency, Secretary General. The last time you were here, you gave the equivalent of a Sermon on the Mount speech. It was an epic speech. And from that speech, we were able to pick a lot of anecdotes, which we have now implemented in our policy, and our board has been very instrumental in that. So I'll skip, thank you, please give him a hand clap. I'll skip the SCFTA for now, because I know you are coming to give us, broadly speaking, what it's all about. The objectives have been partly captured. But more importantly, for us in the community of business in Uganda, and for the media particularly, it's important to emphasize the fact that for the first time, we've been given an opportunity as a country, as a continent, to trade together, to move together, to sell to each other, to invest together, to ensure that we take advantage of opportunities in this continent. And I'll give you a quick example. As part of our push outside Uganda, we visited the Republic of South Africa. We were hosted by His Excellency, Mr. Ramaphosa in Pretoria. It was very interesting to note that we took very good coffee. And while we were taking the coffee, some of us went a little bit further to check the brand of the coffee. This coffee was from a European country. On further investigation and interrogation of the coffee we were drinking, we were surprised to note that the coffee actually originated from Uganda. So it's surprising that we have to ship coffee to Mombasa, send it to Europe, and it is sold in South Africa for us, a Ugandan, to drink coffee from my country at a higher price. That is a very big paradox, and I'm glad that you're here today. So that as a result of that meeting we had in South Africa, we are now going to ship coffee directly to those roasters down south. And those are the benefits of the SEFTM. I thought I needed to emphasize that. So by creating a liberalized market for our goods and services, again, services are things we don't usually emphasize. We like to emphasize hardware. But services are critical because Africa stands with some of the best educated portfolios. We've been responsible for creating some of the best innovations in different areas. So it's important that we take advantage of this. We are now responsible for the contribution of the movement of capital. A lot of our natural resources are being taken out only to come back as processed goods. But for now, we are emphasizing that that's going to change. We need a paradigm shift. We need a mindset change. And not just a mindset change, we need a mindset shift to ensure that we take advantage. But with all of that, of course, comes issues of customs union, non-tariff barriers, movement. And I can quote several examples on even just in our neighborhood, some of the challenges we face because of some of the mindset issues. But allow me to skip the details of the SCFTA, but just to emphasize the need to resolve issues of infrastructure. And I think when I say infrastructure, you know what's happening around us in some of our roads and other places. We need to fix some of those things. We need to clear overlapping membership issues. We are now discussing with the ESC and COMESA and ECOWAS and the Maghreb states to ensure that we create clear, faster, easier, and expedite those regional economic discussions. And I don't want to sound too academic, but it's very, very important to notice that if you count the tariff barriers that are between even just our neighboring states, there are issues. And so part of the dialogue we are emphasizing is the need to remove some of those things. Now, the need for business linkages is very, very important. Standards and products, and I think Madam Olive mentioned that. But now, more importantly, technology is becoming very, very critical. 2 weeks ago, we were in the US for a specialty coffee conference in Oregon. And part of the reason we go for some of those trade fairs is not just to do business. It's not just to do joint ventures. But now more critical is the need to be part of the technological edge. For example, at that conference, Your Excellency, Honorable Ministers, the technology that now is in the coffee value chain is fantastic. From the time you dry, you wash the coffee, to process, to change from, grading. Technology is doing that with some of the artificial intelligence. So as Africans, we need to emphasize the need to up our game in technology transfer. And some of it is not very expensive. Some of it is being developed by some of our fantastic universities in these places. So part of the discussion of a private sector is the need to create a linkage between academia, research, innovation, and industry to remove some of those challenges. Again, I'm racing against time, but I just needed to emphasize the need for things like supply side constraints. Again, I don't want to sound academic. We create business deals and we cannot create an efficient and effective supply chain because of either infrastructure, lack of money. We are now putting together money for an export processing tariff support program. We're looking at the regulatory framework, working with Parliament. As private sector, we are at the forefront of educating our people down to the grassroots, speaking the local language about some of these opportunities. And Your Excellency, just as I close, the issue of partnerships is really something I need to emphasize. For example, with the support of UNDP, we have now been able strategically to meet and engage over 300 companies on export readiness. And not just train them, Your Excellency and Honorable Minister, but even to go further to sponsor them to be able to trade and to attend trade fairs, to go for exhibitions. And I can tell you the element of exposure is immense. As a matter of fact, we have had trade missions to over 8 countries, and now our people are able to export to over 15 nations in the region, and this has helped us. So as I close, as PSFU and as the private sector in Uganda, the issue of implementing projects and programs to enhance especially local communities cannot be overemphasized. And I must say, I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for touching that raw part, which I think every country may not have coffee, may not have copper, may not have steel, may not have cereals, whatever. But every country has one product we all sell. And that is something very close to my heart. It is called tourism. There are over 600 languages and cultures in Africa. No one culture is the same. I would like to emphasize the need for Africans to do cross-border visits, to see the language, the culture, the heritage, the history, the language. Why? It is through these cultural linkages that businesses are formed up. Research has shown that over 60% of people who tour a country start to think of business opportunities. And so I want to emphasize the need for SCFTA to underline in bold letters the need for cross-cultural visits, which then translate into businesses. And for us at PSFU, the 4 mantras we are now singing is business to business, joint ventures, because we may not have enough, technology transfer, and of course, investment. I want to take this time to thank you, Your Excellency, for coming back to Uganda. Uganda is a beautiful country, as you have seen. Kampala is the only city in Africa where people never go to sleep, where businesses don't close. You can have dinner at 3 a.m., change money, buy a suit, and still enjoy the nightlife as if it was daytime. And I thank you very much for coming and blessing this great event. And thank everybody. Let's take advantage of this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Asimwe from PSFU. I did not know that fact about Kampala. It's the only city in Africa that doesn't go to sleep. I think I know particular parts of Kampala that is indeed very true of. But ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm going to ask us to put our hands together for our key partner, without whom I think we would not have been able to have this meeting. Let's put our hands together for the resident representative, UNDP, Madame Elsie Atfa, as she comes to give us her remarks. Come on, a little louder until she makes her way to the microphone.
MC did not pronounce my name properly, and so he needs to buy me dinner. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me first start with the protocols and recognize Honorable Francis Mwebweza, Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. Also, let me recognize Honorable Frederick Gume, Minister of State for Cooperatives, officials of the Government of Uganda, Ms. Olive Chigongo, President of Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Stephen Nasimwe, Chief Executive Officer, Private Sector Foundation, Dr. Ezra Muhumuza, Executive Director, Uganda Manufacturers Association, and let me recognize all the eminent business persons, colleagues and friends in the diplomatic community, development partners, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to you all. A very good afternoon to you all once again. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, a special welcome to you. And on behalf of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and indeed our larger United Nations family, a hearty welcome to you to the Pearl of Africa, the home of over half of the world's mountain gorillas, the snow-capped Rwenzori Mountains, breathtaking natural landscapes, vibrant cultures, and intensely luscious coffee. The country is a marvel and a sight for the sore eyes. And I just wanted to say this also to support what Mr. Simwe said, that this is a beautiful country and we have to support the tourism agenda. Allow me to extend a vote of thanks to the government of Uganda and the business membership organization, really for the sterling leadership and for inviting UNDP to co-convene this private sector engagement with His Excellency Wamkele Mene, a unique opportunity for us to amplify the conversation about the role of intra-African trade in accelerating structural transformation and driving inclusive development. And let me speak a bit from my heart moving forward from now. Why is this important? Why does it matter now? Why is it an imperative? And first of all, we are living in a time of uncertainty. And the last year, 2021-2022, UNDP authored a report, a human development report, which talked about the era of uncertainty. And we see uncertainties as a result of COVID. We see uncertainties as a result of war. We see uncertainties as a result of climate crisis. And we have seen human development retrogress 2 years in a row in the last 30 years that we haven't seen before. So what does it mean for us? To redouble our efforts means that we have to focus on trade and intra-African trade. And in an era of uncertainties, we need to look within and explore the fullest potential of the continent. But why does it matter again? Development is being defunded. Those of us in the development space, we have seen that money that traditionally comes from overseas development assistance is going down. And why is it going down? It's going down for a number of reasons, including the geopolitics of the world, which is determining where funding would go. But what does it mean for Africa? Because I recollect not so long ago, I interacted with one of our partners who just told me our priorities have changed and we're sending our monies to elsewhere. I don't want to mention that because I need to be politically savvy, and therefore our focus on Africa is changing. So what does it mean for us when development is being defunded? That Africa needs to generate its own wealth through its trade amongst itself. And the fact that we trade amongst ourselves only 16.6% is something that needs to be reversed. But why does it matter in times like this again? We have a youthful population. And I think Mr. Simwe talked about that. Africa is the youngest continent on earth. And in the next few years, 1 out of every 4 in the world would be an African. And so what does it mean for us when our young people don't have jobs? When they are unemployed between the ages of 15 and 35 years, 1 out of 3 don't have jobs. So how do we create jobs? we have to create jobs by trading amongst ourselves. Because eventually when you're looking at trade and you work back the value chain, there are faces behind it. There are young men and young women behind it that we can support. And so this is not just something that's a superficial conversation. It's a conversation for African youth, and the imperatives of finding jobs for our youth. Because otherwise we are sitting on a time bomb where people cannot find jobs to do, even if they're finished universities. And in a time when artificial intelligence is even taking over your job before you even finish university, how do we reorient our thinking around trade and trade matters? But why does it matter again? From development practice, we can also see while there's great progress and growth in our continent, we also see poverty and inequality. And it's huge. And this is something that we have to address. And finally, development practice and experience also shows that there is no country that has ever achieved rapid economic growth and prosperity without trading with its countries and partners. So I just wanted to lay this foundation because I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it's quite important for people to begin to think why this matters for Uganda, why this matters for Africa, and why is it that we as UNDP, as the largest development agency in the United Nations family, are putting our weight behind us? Because it's a development issue. And we want everyone to appreciate that. Please feel free to give a round of applause if you've been touched by what I said, because you have to be touched by it. I know His Excellency Wamkele is going to talk about the importance of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, the larger goal, the poverty eradication objectives, and many more, so I will not go into all that. But I just wanted to highlight a few things, why it matters, and what does it mean for us in terms of moving forward. What do we have to do? How can we take this business a bit more seriously than we have done? And I just wanted to highlight a few things building what Madam Chigongo and Mr. Simwe said. First of all, there are a couple of things that we need to do. Unlocking the potential of the AFCFTA in Uganda and by extension Africa, and seizing the opportunities presented by trade agreement necessitates a concerted effort and alignment of public, private, regional, and international partners to a number of things. First of all, the need for us to develop very focused and complementary policies and strategies to attract export-oriented foreign direct investment, boost transformative industrialization, and eliminate non-tariff barriers, which I think was talked about by Mr. Simwe. And on this, I commend the government of Uganda, which has, with the support of UNDP, put in place an AFCFTA implementation strategy, which has been curated to facilitate the identification of key value chain and trade opportunities that we can tap into. So the need for us to have strategy. And I wish in meetings like this as well, whilst we have the Ministry of Trade, we also have the Ministry of Agriculture, we have the Ministry of Tourism. What is the collective strategy for us to move this forward? The second one is to invest in connectivity and high-quality infrastructure that delivers goods and services. For goods to move easily across borders, a well-established supply chain needs to be put in place. But challenges around supply chain management, including poor communications and transportation infrastructure, continue to be a pain point. Turning Africa into a real single market, a market where goods and services and people move freely from Cairo to Cape Town or from Accra to Kampala, requires us to close the regional infrastructure gaps. A massive and strategic investment in connectivity and high-quality infrastructure is needed to foster trade and a conducive business climate. And therefore, on that part, the government of Uganda, with the support of UNDP, is designing a digital transformation roadmap that will, amongst others, boost Uganda's participation in e-commerce, facilitate the efficient and secure flow of money across borders, and foster investment and the creation of virtual employment markets. So this is very important. The infrastructure. We live in an era where we are in metaverse in some countries. Some people are doing tourism in the metaverse. In other words, through artificial intelligence and others, you put it around your eye, you can see what is happening, the gorillas in our beautiful country. But what if we don't have the infrastructure for some of these things and inspire young people, especially the youth, to be able to create things that helps us to even to do e-commerce in the metaverse? And this is why a digital transformation roadmap for us is also important as part of our support to the AFCFTA agenda. The third thing that we think is important is to enhance the beneficiation of raw materials and strengthen participation in regional value chains. The ability of AFCFTA to drive Africa's transformation depends on the successful transition from current inward-looking approaches to trade and investment towards the strengthening of regional value chains, where different segments of the industry value chain are located across the continent, reflecting local comparative advantage. Uganda's AFCFTA National Implementation Strategy identified coffee, for example, as one of the value chains in which the country has a competitive advantage. Building the value addition capacity in this strategic sector will accelerate Uganda's participation in the coffee regional and global value chain. And according to the World Bank, a 1% increase in the global value chain participation boosts per capita income levels by more than 1%, about twice as much as conventional trade. And finally, build the capacity of the small and medium-scale enterprises to harness the potential of AFCFTA and benefit from expanding continental trade values. And again, I know that our colleagues in the private sector have talked about it, so I'll not repeat it. Your Excellency, Honorable Ministers, as development practitioners, UNDP is accompanying Uganda and the continent on this great journey of transformation and hope for our people in a manner that accelerates the widespread attainment of socioeconomic progress. As an African myself, it is a paradox that we have all it takes to prosper as a continent, and yet we still have segments, and quite significant segments of our continent, wallowing in poverty. And therefore, we believe very strongly that we need to accompany this process and put all our weight behind this for the people of Africa. So allow me to say a few things that we are doing as UNDP. I know a few of them were highlighted. I want to thank our colleagues for sharing some of our support to the private sector. But in the context of our program of work as UNDP, but also the broader United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework in this country, there are a couple of things that we are doing. I'm going to go through them very quickly in the interest of time. First of all is supporting the country to create an enabling legal policy and regulatory environment, and therefore the work that we are supporting now, we supported the National Industrialization Policy and Strategy, which truly is a backbone to the AFCFTA, the AFCFTA National Implementation Strategy itself, a national branding and packaging strategy, which I think Madam Chigongo also talked about. And these are some of the things we are doing within the broader policy, legal, and regulatory framework to support the country. The second thing that we are supporting is also to enhance existing capacities and capabilities of SMEs so that they can participate in and benefit from the One Africa market. Again, there's a lot of work that we have done with the business membership organization, countrywide advocacy, campaigns, awareness raising to make sure that they position themselves in that regard. But also building on some of this work, we are practically also facilitating some of the trade deals that are happening and supporting that. We know Mr. Simwe and a couple of colleagues were in DRC, Congo, Uganda, and DRC, where we also supported the team that went there, and I think they managed to get some deals. As I understand currently, about $8.3 million trade was realized during that trip. We were also recently in South Africa, and I want to thank Ambassador Lulu, who is here, and the government of Uganda and many more that supported the business summit in South Africa. We were there as UNDP. I was there personally with my colleagues to support this. And we know that this summit, which was led by two presidents of South Africa and Uganda, also realized some trade deals. And we understand that the Monty company, for example, is signing an agreement to establish a plant worth $30 million for the manufacture of electronic transformers to be exported to South Africa. The Federal Foods Company also confirmed order of about 5 megatons of sweet yellow bananas, 1.4 megatons of avocado fruits, and 700,000 megatons of pineapple. So we can see that a lot of the work that we are doing under the leadership of government and in partnership with the private sector is showing some good results, which we need to build on. The third thing that we are also helping is to provide technical support for the establishment of a trade financing facility. In many of the conversations that we had here, in many places where we have been, it keeps coming back to say trade needs to be financed. How do we facilitate trade through financing? And therefore, we are providing advice to government as we speak now in partnership with the private sector organization on a facility that avails innovative finance and alternative finance to support young businesses especially. And very quickly, we also trying to foster development discourse on the imperatives needed to harness the potential of AFCFTA, and we've been having different conversations, or supporting different conversations, including the National Youth Council, even development partners, looking into commercial diplomacy. I think a couple of months ago, we supported government to bring ambassadors who are here, African ambassadors, to highlight some of the things, why it's important for us. And I also want to appreciate the leadership of Ambassador Lulu, who is here, who actually put it into practice during South Africa's Women's Day. Actually hosted a number of people, include women from different parts of the region who were here, who exhibited. I bought myself some of the things they brought, and that was a clear way of practicing the AFCFTA, and we're encouraging more ambassadors and others to also do the similar thing. And so let me just try to conclude. Your Excellency Wamkele Mene, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, to do all these things, I think we need to strengthen our partnerships. Partnership across sectors, partnerships within private sector, and we are pushing some of these partnerships very, very strongly. Honorable Minister and His Excellency Wamkele, we last week, for example, were having conversations with the Uganda Airlines, which is the face in many ways of the country when it goes out there. And one of the things we discussed, if you go to Burundi or you go to Lagos, you don't want to go with your A330 Neo with the belly empty. And so how do we make these things possible? And so these conversations are happening, and we are pushing the boundaries on a number of things, including the tourism area, where we are helping cultural leaders, for example, curate products that will sell the country elsewhere. And we do hope that we would invite you back again to witness some of these things that we would be unveiling soon. So before us, as I conclude, is an opportunity to change the destinies of Uganda, men and women, boys and girls, but the destinies of Africa, men and women, boys and girls, by offering a new pathway to make trade easier, more streamlined, and less costly. The successful implementation of the AFCFTA will depend on us all working together in the spirit of unity and solidarity. This engagement is a step forward in working together to strengthen the readiness of Africa's exporters, both current and prospective, to maximize opportunities in the AFCFTA in accelerating progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and actualizing the Africa that we want. It is a season to fulfill the promise and deliver on the hope of the people of Uganda and Africa. I reiterate my appreciation once again to the government of Uganda and the business support organizations for co-convening this engagement with UNDP. I thank you all. I wish us all very fruitful deliberations, and I want to welcome you once again. Your Excellency Wamkele Mene, I know we have a strong partnership with you as UNDP at the regional level, with our regional director, Ahuna Eziakonwa, who has put all her efforts behind this agenda. And so once again, thank you very much for the audience, and looking forward to us doing some more for our beautiful continent and make sure that we take our place, our rightful place. in the globe. Thank you.
Come on, I think she needs a round of applause. I'll not dare to mention Mama's name again, lest I owe her 2 dinners. But speaking of dinner, we actually have a dinner for all of us tonight, and you're all encouraged to stay behind. I'll be giving you directions for that a little later. But ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, allow me invite the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives to come and have the official opening of this dialogue. Let's put our hands together for Honorable Francis Mwebesa as he makes his way here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There is indeed hope for Africa 2063, the Africa that we all want to see.
Your Excellency, Wamkele Omeni, Secretary General, African Continental Free Trade Area. My colleague, Minister of Cooperatives, heads of government institutions, Your Excellencies, Your Excellency, the Ambassador of South Africa, Your Excellency, our Ambassador to Ghana, here in the place of the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, other government officials present, Chairperson, Uganda Manufacturers Association, Executive Director, Private Sector Foundation, Uganda, President of Uganda Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the media, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start on my speech, I want to thank you. If I pronounce your name badly, like the Master of Ceremonies here, you excuse me, but I know you as LC. I will find it very difficulties. I will find it difficulties in delivering my speech when you have covered almost what I would have said. But all what I want to tell you, I say, let me quote Oliver Twist once some more from you, as I understand, and I think you should be given a clap by whoever is present here. I also thank Madame Chigongo and your Executive Director of Private Sector Foundation. Your Excellency, Wamkele Mene, Secretary General, African Continental Free Trade Area, I take this opportunity on behalf of government of the People Republic of Uganda and on my own behalf to welcome you to Uganda, and in particular Kampala, which is not only the administrative hub for the country, but also the commercial center for Uganda. Allow me also to welcome the heads of various private sector apex institutions that are here to this very important engagement. In the same measure, I also welcome the business community from whom this engagement has been organized. In October 2022, Secretary General Mene visited Uganda and had an engagement with His Excellency, the President of Uganda, General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, and interacted with the CEOs in Uganda during the annual CEO Forum. During his first visit, the Secretary General discussed various trade-related issues, but in short, it was focused on how to prepare Uganda to take advantage of the great market opportunities within the African Continental Free Trade Area. Your Excellency, Uganda takes matters of regional integration very seriously and is on the key pillar in our third National Development Plan, and the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade is a great opportunity for Uganda as far as promotion of regional trade, value chain, and Pan-African investment is concerned. A 2023 report by United Nations Conference Trade and Development estimates intra-African trade at about just USA dollars 71 billion, which is just about 14.4 of the total African exports and growing over at 7%, but forecasts show that African Continental Free Trade Area could boost intra-Africa trade by about 33 and cut the continent's trade deficit by 51%. We see EFCTA as a vehicle for unlocking the potential of intra-African trade, reducing the deficit and providing the much-needed employment and revenue. Uganda's exports to African market has been a growing trend since 2019 from USA dollars 1.341 billion to rising up to USA dollars 1.418 billion in 2020, and in 2021 we exported goods worth of 1.776 billion. Your Excellency, and all the guests here, the most interesting aspect of these growing export figures is the nature of the products exported. They are mainly manufactured products that include iron and steel, sugar, animal, vegetable fats and oils, cement, dairy and dairy products. Topping the export list is coffee, which unfortunately is still being exported in the same processed form. This therefore implies that regional markets offer real opportunities for expanding Uganda's industrial base and further opportunities of growth of industrialization in the country, which is another key pillar in our National Development Plan. We welcome the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation and urge for speedy acceleration. On the import side, there has also been some positive growth in imports from the continent. In 1919, imports from the continents amounted to USA dollars 2.041, reaching USA dollar 2.879 billion in 2021. And the products imported are gold, iron ore, and steel, and cereals, among other products. Your Excellency, I must commend you for the effort you are making in assuring acceleration of the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I would like you to give it a clap. And boosting intra-African trade has an important mission. In realizing the fulfillment of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, I must also commend you for triggering this through guided trade initiative, of which Uganda is already a member. A team from your secretariat was here from the 18th, 19th April this year to undertake verification of Uganda's readiness to start trading, and I'm happy to report that the report indicates that Uganda is ready or was already ready long time ago. I must, however, point out the following, which is among other issues that the private sector will raise, or the few problems the private sector, Madame Oli Wichigongo, and so was Asimwe of the Private Sector Foundation, that the private sector will raise will be presented for discussion and consideration. Pan-African logistics for trade, such as transport, infrastructure, and connectivity with all the associated costs. How the continents will address financing for trade. how the continent will address financing for trade, addressing for non-tariff barriers, particularly those arising from misapplication of non-tariff measures. Measures toward effective promotion, creation, and harnessing benefits from the regional value chain. How to address challenges of specific to the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and what tools action are required to propel their participation in the AFCTA. Effective participation of the private sector in the AFCTA, and how to build their sector competitiveness. How to address the costs associated with tariff reduction and association revenues. As I conclude, present the above issues for discussion among the many that will arise from our engagement today. I must also thank the private sector Uganda, Uganda Manufacturers Association, the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry for organizing this forum, and I extend my appreciation to our development partner. I may repeat it again, the UNDP, led by Elsie. You know, when she speaks, sometimes I think she's the whole of Africa, though she's a UNDP representative. And I extend my appreciation to our development partner, United Nations Development Program, for supporting this forum. I now formally open this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for officially opening this dialogue and for those remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, some people have been inquiring about coffee and tea. Right after the next speech, we shall officially break for a tea break, but our waiters are also on standby to serve you if you would like. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for the Executive Director, UMA, Mr. Ezra Muhumuza, as he comes to give the Uganda private sector position paper pertaining to the African continent free trade. Let's give him a round of applause as he makes his way here to present that paper. Mr. Muhumuza. He will be, all right, no problem.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Foremost is to say that allow me to adopt the protocol that has been very well articulated by the previous speakers. My name is not Dr. Muhumuza. My name is Richard Mubiru, a board member at UMA. I am here to represent Dr. Muhumuza, who is unable to be with us. And mine is a very simple one. Is basically to share the private sector position paper on this very beautiful subject for our discussion. And allow me not to delve into the background, because I know that if the Secretary General for the AFCTA is here, there cannot be a better person to delve into that. I will not bore you with that. But I will mention, ladies and gentlemen, the context that we look at as private sector for purposes of our participation. And number one is to understand that, of course, we're talking about 54 countries with a population of almost 1.5 billion people, as of 2021. And of course, in terms of agro production, we are talking about a continent that has almost 900 million hectares of land with only less than 300 hectares under cultivation, which presents a very unique opportunity in terms of food production into the future. Of course, not to forget that we have a very young population across the board. 60 to 70% of our population on the continent is anywhere below 35 years, as already highlighted, and therefore, the very reason why we should really be worried if we don't plan for their future. But also, most importantly, the contribution, Africa's contribution to global GDP remaining persistently very low, way under $5 trillion. And this is very, very disturbing against the fact that we have this kind of potential as I highlighted. And I will delve into the situation analysis of where we happen to be. Currently, intra-African trade, of course, is very poor relative to the rest of the world, under 15%, whereas the rest of the world is doing 60%. And the very reason why we have to take advantage of this opportunity to trade more. And I think, as opposed to the rest of the world, which is as good as saturated, we have a major opportunity to drive trade, but also to associate with what actually the representative of UNDP mentioned. The future for Africa must be for Africans. Yes, we have lived in a continent where all the time we blame the West for our challenges. But I think the future belongs to the organized, and I think with the initiative that we have on table, we should be able to develop the continent. Export destinations has already been touched, but I think the most outstanding out of all this is the fact that we have opportunity to deepen our intra-Africa trade, looking at where we have specific competitive advantage. And I like the numbers. I will delve into the numbers. I know that there was a submission to do with coffee, but I want to tell you that whereas we are number 8 as coffee producers on the planet Earth, we don't even fetch $1 billion. Where we sit as private sector, we would want coffee as a single item to really start fetching as good as at least $3 billion. And of course, I debate this in the context of the fact that our import bill is $10 billion. Now, when we're able to do $3 billion of export, it means that we are actually beginning as a country to start collecting actually our trade deficit that we have suffered for many years. Looking at the top 10 imports is an area of strategic importance for the private sector. Of course, I will mention where we think that actually we can do something to reverse where we stand in terms of intra-Africa trade, and I'll pitch the issue of petroleum products. We're in the region of $1 billion in terms of imports, and I remember that shortly after COVID, when we had Europeans fighting under the current Ukraine-Russia conflict, everybody was bothered, and what is surprising is that Africa remains a major crude oil exporter. So where we sit as private sector, we think that it's about time to really actualize our capacity to sitting on the table with big boys to determine the future energy requirements for our continent. And this is not so complex. And I liked the video by the chamber which speaks to the progress we are making in the space of oil and gas beneficiation as a country. The next is a trade in services. I remember, yes, my good brother, Mr. Simwe, delving into this, but for me I will touch, of course, the greatest opportunity that we seem not to have already touched, and that is to basically be able to export the excess capacity of teachers that we have, the excess capacity of health workers that we have. Don't ask me about the ongoing strike for medical workers in Uganda. I know that the public sector has not been able to employ all of them, and they continue to find their ways into other geographies on the continent, and many people are taking advantage of them. The thinking of the private sector is that we should have a much more organized way of doing things. I was seated with my brother, Sam Watasa. He's a guru in trade, in services trade. We would want to see really conversations around that so that we can improve on what we are able to get. Yes, we are doing fairly well by exporting as many Ugandans into the Middle East, but I think that we can do much better when this trade is much more organized. The next item is that we have to deal with the high propensity to import from outside the continent, and the figures that I have to share this afternoon is for the Nigerian experience on milk. US dollars 1.6 billion is the worth of milk that is imported into Nigeria. Now, from a Ugandan perspective, this gives us actually great opportunity because per year production is almost touching 3 billion liters, which means that on milk alone, we can be able actually to partake of this for as long as we will be able to address the impediments to deepening intra-Africa trade. The next, which is number 6 point for our discussion, is that our agriculture sector in Uganda is still doing great, but can do better. It is giving livelihood to 70% of the population, and unfortunately still contributing a paltry 24.1% to GDP as at 2021. But even in the present circumstances, contributing 33% of export earnings in terms of either export of commodities or agro-processed items. Friends, where we sit as private sector, we would want to see really a paradigm shift in this area, to see agriculture contribute at least 50% to GDP. And I'm impressed that we have National Planning Authority with us. Countries that are making progress are registering better than this. You cannot have 70% of your population contributing 24% to GDP. And of course, where we live, we would like to see commercialization and modernization of agriculture. Government is trying to do one or two things here, but our major indicator is that the uptake of fertilizers is under 5% in Uganda. The optimal that would be really the working target as far as the private sector is concerned should be 25%. And of course, this should speak to the beneficiation of the school phosphates so that we can stop relying on nature for agro-production. The other very interesting thing, and this very much played out during COVID-19, is that we contribute the biggest disease burden on the continent, or rather on the planet Earth. And because of that, we're importing close to $10 billion of pharmaceutical products as of 2019. And EAC as a region where Uganda sits imports 70% of its pharmaceutical needs, valued at $1.3 billion as of 2021. Broadly speaking, it means that Africa and Uganda in particular is failing yet to take advantage of the USD 1.42 trillion market for pharmaceuticals. And where we sit as private sector, Secretary General and our Minister for Trade is in the space that is pitching for taking advantage of the pharmaceutical capacities that is emerging in this country, which of course I know that the Secretary General must have seen on visiting Cipla Quality Chemicals, but also to mention that the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fact that we can actually partake of the pathogenic economy sitting where we sit in Uganda. And I will mention what actually saved my life and many Ugandans, which was Covidex. This Covidex is basically a discovery by one of our pharmacists, the good Professor Francis Ogwang of Madarra University. Honorable Minister, where we sit as private sector, we know that Uganda has developed a lot of capacity in terms of management of hemorrhagic fevers. You mentioned Marburg, you mentioned Ebola, you mentioned any one of them. I think the time is now for us to leverage collaborative research in the pathogenic area to doing really strategic vaccines and drugs production. I will pitch more on this. Where we sat during COVID-19, we saw how the world can walk out on Africa, especially when vaccine nationalism set in. And we remember how the developed West could book all the vaccines beyond even what they could use. As private sector, I think COVID-19 was the defining moment. We cannot afford to again start blaming the West for failure, especially to manage hemorrhagic fevers, which we know are very unique to Africa. There's something that we did not pitch here. I would pitch even the issue of malaria plus HIV/AIDS. I can stand here to say that if these two diseases affected the West the way they affect the continent, we would no longer be debating presence of malaria on this continent. So time has come for us really to know that the elder brother who was our keeper yesterday, like the UNDP country representative mentioned, has got really other priorities. The geopolitics are setting, and Africa seems to be abandoned. But we believe that as private sector, the future belongs to the organized, and since we are getting much more organized, we should be able to partake of the benefits that can come through this. Friends, I want to delve into strategic challenges for Uganda to being able to leverage its market share on the continent. Number one is inadequate market information. Yes, we recognize the great strides being made in terms of putting this together, but I think it's still work in progress. We can do much more better, especially in the direction of putting together reliable data that can justify and sustain export decisions, because the greatest exporters on planet Earth are strong because they are very strong on information. The second bottleneck is actually something to do with infrastructure. The minister spoke about this, but I can tell you this is inhibiting deepening of intra-Africa trade to levels that exporting and or importing into China would be a fraction of what it would cost you to be able actually to trade in Africa. And we think that it's a major impediment for which, fortunately, we have diagonized a way forward, as I will be sharing in a moment. The next is financing. Financing remains a major challenge. Nevertheless, we take cognizance of Afrexim Bank and the good work that the bank has been able to do over time. But I want to mention, Mr. Secretary General, that Afrexim is still for the big boys. And my senior, Madame Olive Chigongo, mentioned that we are still SMEs largely in Uganda. Because of this, your typical SME is not able really to match the documentation requirement for Afrexim Bank. We would want to see an Afrexim Bank that resonates with the majority of the exporters on the continent who are largely SMEs. Item number 4 under this segment is standards compliance. And I think this is something where there is a work in progress, especially leveraging some good work that our government has done in terms of the EAC and COMESA. But because the greatest portion of our exporters are SMEs, they cannot afford really the cost of compliance to standards. We think that we can innovate around this in terms of management of the cost. The last item under this segment is political volatility. As business people, we don't have so many comments on that. We know that we have leaders here from the political side of things that really must have a conversation around that, although under the interventions that we have identified, we have found a way of dealing with the political volatility on the continent. And allow me to take you through very quickly, in the interest of time. Item number 1 is basically establishing a robust trade information portal leveraging ICT. It was already mentioned in a previous sharing by our members. And we think that because we have a very young population, they can adopt to this very quickly. And we think that it's not very, very expensive to do. We only need the indulgence of the Secretariat and take this forward. Of course, working with the trade associations that we already have in Kampala. The second one is to do with the infrastructure deficit. Mention roads, railway, power, waterways, border markets, air transport. Everything is lacking. Our thinking is that the continent must visualize transcontinental infrastructure projects, and the continent must start looking at solutions beyond the budget to finance infrastructure. The greatest news that we have for Uganda is that the Minister of Finance has come up with something very interesting called the Public Investment Financing Strategy, which speaks to the National Development Plan 3. And just to set the stage for this is to tell you that Uganda requires 411.7 trillion as a budget for 5 years to manage doing various programs, most of them infrastructure, which creates a funding gap of 33 trillion on an annual basis for Uganda to ever be able to deliver on this. As private sector, we think that there is something that we can do about this, and this is in the area of mainstreaming public-private partnerships. We know that where we cannot, we have global friends, especially in Asia, and partly partly Europe, that can come on board to really leverage these models for financing infrastructure. And where we sit is to say that since most of the African governments are really choking on debt, we need to concession most of this financing, and a model around this should be a model that must be embraced at a continental level to address infrastructural development challenges. Without having to collaborate on this, if I may, there is no way Africa will ever be able to finance its infrastructure deficit. I have just shared with you what we require as a country, Uganda, to be able to finance our infrastructure needs. It's the kind of money that we can only dream to get, especially in the medium term. So it is only strategic that we have to act together and pool synergies to addressing infrastructural challenges. The next is credit access through the Afrexim Bank. The message to you, Secretary General, here is to recalibrate the bank to speak to the SME that dominate really the exporters on the continent and who are unable to ground proposals that can be financed. I come from an entity that has been able to pick financing from Afrexim, and I can tell you, even with our great experience, it was a major challenge. So it is impossible for SMEs to ever think about really being able to access monies from Afrexim Bank, which is why we think that we need to restructure the bank to speak to the SME majority if we are to export. The next is something very great, and we must commend you on the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. The only flip side to it is that it's taking too long to be able to really bring value on table. And again, leveraging personal experience is that we have markets that are devoid of dollars right now. They are devoid of dollars, and yet where we come from as manufacturers, I can tell you that we are operating anywhere in the region of 63% of our installed capacities, which means that we can almost double the export of value-added goods without adding new dollars. Now, we cannot export to these countries, and I don't want to mention them. I have learned diplomacy from this room. I don't have to mention these countries, but I tell you for a fact, you get there and there are no dollars. You have goods, but there are no dollars. How will you take value from these countries? So, Secretary General, since you are here, as private sector in Uganda, this is something that must have been done yesterday, because it's a reality on the continent, and we must deal with it decisively if really we can partake of the advantages we have on the continent. The next is the SME export readiness training. Without a doubt, we acknowledge, we thanks the interventions by UNDP, Chamber, etc. We can only ask for more, because really SMEs remain the majority of our players to do exports. They are everywhere in the country. They need to be gotten where they live. Much of our exports is especially at the level of the youth and women, remains largely informal, and we know this for a fact, even though, even at that level, we are seeing numbers moving in a direction of $500 million for DR Congo alone, And you can imagine what this number would become if we are more organized. The simulation of numbers that we have done, where we sit, for Congo alone, the simulation that we have done points to the fact that the number of $500 billion can actually move into the direction of $2 to $2.5 billion. Now, we only need to have these young people and women really anchored well enough to be able to trade as exporters. But I think also the other argument that we need to resolve when it comes to the SMEs is to bring forth the idea of working together. Because SMEs, with their level of experience, of course, they are not yet exposed to strategic synergies of pooling capacities like big corporates can do, which is why we think that we need really to train them and prepare them for the future. Item number 6, ladies and gentlemen, is de-risking of exports through the establishment of export guarantee schemes. I did mention to you that we don't discuss politics in business, but I think this is one innovation that we have come up with. Look at the volatility of countries that Uganda can export to, and I'll mention them very quickly. One of them is DR Congo, and I don't have to mention the political situation in the country. You look at Somalia, we have boots on ground. Can we export there? You know what happens in Somalia. Central African Republic, you can go to South Sudan. You can keep naming them. So the point we are trying to put across here is that we need a product that can de-risk exports. I can tell you, every sizable manufacturer in Uganda has got excess capacity that can be exported. Why are we not optimally exporting? Because it is too risky. When you export, you either must have to do it against a letter of credit or advance payment. Now, in most of the countries that form the natural market, as far as Uganda is concerned, because of her geography, have that element of volatility. And Secretary General, what we are trying to really pitch here is that we don't want any free thing. We need a product that can be paid for by the private sector. Just like I insure my car comprehensively, when I meet an accident, I don't look for a minister. I go to an insurance company who actually insured me, and I sort out my misfortune with the insurer. This is something that we're speaking to. We think that it can be best managed at the level of Africa, because then the cost will fundamentally come down. And I will share an experience. Asia can export for as much as they can. And I will mention China here. But look at the kind of export facilitating infrastructure that they have. They are able to deal with any country that you can fear to deal with as an African country. Why? Because China is able to de-risk exports. It's not so much about super competitiveness of China. We have done numbers. We can be able to stand against them. But can we have this product? The private sector is willing and ready to pay for it, but we need it. We needed it yesterday. As I come to conclude, progress monitoring and evaluation mechanism. Where we sit in private sector, we only earn when we work. And we want to introduce this component. I have been attending these discourses, and I think this is third in this very room. I would want to be discussing numbers when I next come to another. How can we be able to do this? We can be able to do this if we can leverage the regional recs that we have, because the infrastructure of capturing data and trying to do real information asymmetry, etc., is already available at that level. We need to leverage it and to know that in the last 6 months, Uganda has been able to export X amount into Africa. Friends, change can only come when we actually start doing exports. We can come and talk. Talking is very good, but we're not always very good at talking as private sector. We would want really to be coming here and evaluating progress that we're making. In conclusion, friends, and maybe before then, allow me to most sincerely thank, of course, the organizers that have been able to put together this, and in a very special way, the UNDP, for financing this. It gives a lot of encouragement to the private sector that we can debate really deepening intra-Africa trade. But beyond trade, we want to add the aspect of investment as well. Because speaking value chains, yes, we can do the growing of coffee in Uganda, but we need not necessarily be able to value add onto that coffee. Yet, Africa gives us the opportunity to leverage capacities that could be elsewhere within the region or within the continent. So we think that has been very, very, very interesting. UNDP, we can only cry for more from you. To government of Uganda, thank you so much for bringing this to bear. And we think that we can do much more better together, especially in the areas of putting together things to do with rules of origin, perfection, and of course, exhausting the agenda negotiating positions that have not yet formed fully. Lastly is to say that Ugandan private sector has had an experience really of trading competitively under the EAC and COMESA, and I think is only waiting for every opportunity. And I can tell you, friends, and at a very personal level, that it is possible. I can share an experience of what we have had to do as a group. Now I'll leverage my other directorship in NITIL. We have been able, and I know all of you Ugandans know, to export armed forces uniforms by air from Entebbe to Equatorial Guinea. This is something that nobody could have ever expected to happen from Uganda. We have done it, and therefore we think that you also can do it, but the future is for the organized. We need to keep on synergizing our efforts to doing better, and I can dare tell you that we can be able to reduce the trade deficit. For me, it worries me when we actually import much more than we can export, and I would want to live in a Uganda where we are actually exporting much more than we can import. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mubiru, on behalf of Mr. Muhumuza. I think he has done a splendid job in, presenting that very detailed position of the private sector. And like he closed with his example, if they can do it with the military fatigue, we can also did it, like one president is famous to have said. Just to remind you, of course, it's still a working tea or coffee. If you haven't yet indulged, feel free to just walk there and pick yourself a cup. We also have a number of exhibitors, though I've noticed one of them has been slightly more aggressive and brought some of her exhibits to your table. Please be advised, they're not exhibits. You can actually engage. So whether it's some milk or some yogurt, feel free to enjoy as you deem fit. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into a panel discussion, and the topic of which is exploring the opportunities within the African Continental Free Trade Area. And coming to moderate this panel is one who is absolutely equal to the task. He is a technical advisor to the UNCCI, and he also represents Uganda on the General Council of the International Chamber of Commerce and World Chambers Federation. Let's put our hands together for Mr. David Ofungi, who will come and he'll go on to introduce his panelists and pick it up from there. David, you're welcome.
Thank you. So I have been called up to the panel to chair at a time when I'm competing with Ugandan coffee, so that's not an enviable task, but I've had my fill, so I'm fresh and ready to go. Can I first start by, I know there's a bit of an acknowledgement from Stephen of his board, and I know Madam President has spoken on behalf of the chamber, but there's a few other chamber representatives here. Blessing and your team, if you might just stand up for recognition. My paycheck has a bearing on some of this diplomacy. I'm going to call up my esteemed panel in no particular order, because there's a sequence of questioning that I'll articulate. But I'd like to first start by having Mr. Herbert Byarugaba from UTA. Feel free to give him a bit of a clap as he walks up. There's also a representative from Afrexim Bank, Mr. Emeka. Is he here? Asante. We've got Stuart Mwesi. He's a perennial panelist. He's from my senior Stuart, Karibu. It's free seating. We've got Nicholas Cafero from, he's a freight forwarders. Thank you very much, Stuart. Nicholas? Still. And then we have Mr. Joseph Awino, who's a GM sales for Brookside Fresh Dairy. So those freebies on your table are courtesy of his enterprise. As Mr. Wino comes up, allow me, Your Excellency, Madam President, and Stephen, we had every intention to have the construct of our panel to reflect the diversity that you had as standalone speakers. This was not the paperwork we submitted. We didn't have any intention to have an all-male panel. The approval committee sent something back. We had two ladies on the panel who sadly sent an apology last minute. It is particularly important because the president of the chamber has been talking about women-led SMEs. But rest assured that the employees of my panelists are more than 50% women. Madam Elsie, we apologize, but we are where we are. I think the second part of it is that, allow me to reference an interesting conversation, because whenever you talk about Ugandan enterprise, there's always going to be a recurring conversation about coffee. There's a conversation about tourism. We had a coffee specialist on the panel who also sadly couldn't make it. But I rest assured that the content that we have right here is truly reflective of industry. And if you look at the exhibitors here, there's sufficient diversity within our panel. I want to start very quickly by appointing my timekeeper, Blessing. If we can, I'd like to keep it to 3 minutes per question. I am the only person allowed to extend on time. And I think another thing that I like to do when I chair these sessions is also co-opt co-moderators. So it's not really going to be a one-dimensional conversation. If you think that there's something pressing on your side that needs to be articulated, please feel free to interrupt. We have His Excellency here for one day, so he needs to go with as much content on the designs or intentions of our private sector back to Accra, so that he has enough food for thought to understand what specific nuances we need for our country. So I'm going to start with a bit of a story. And in fact, I don't know if everyone here is old enough to remember, before Steve Jobs went back to Apple, he invested in a company called Pixar. Pixar is a specialist in computer animation. It was subsequently bought by Disney. The first it released was a film called Toy Story. I don't know if people know Toy Story. So Toy Story was, the plot is quite elaborate, but basically there was a bunch of old toys that a young boy owned. They were in his box. And for the boy's birthday, he got a new toy, a new shiny toy called Buzz Lightyear. He thought it was a rocket ship. And what happened is that the existing toys felt threatened by the new acquisition. So the one-dimensional toys, Woody, etc., thought that this new, shiny new battery-powered toy was going to become his favorite. And long story short, there was an elaborate plot to get rid of Buzz Lightyear. Eventually, they became friends. But the point I'm trying to bring out here is that in the context of trade, if you look at the contents of our containers going out, it is easy to feel threatened by the competition from other markets. The contents that we're importing have foundational aspects that address aspects around trade, finance, the skill set that requires to get that productivity up. And for us, given the contents of our coffee, and to Steve's point, if it's going to Europe to get into South Africa, we need to do some recalibration in country so that our containers in the Pixar context or the Toy Story context are sufficiently competitive. And I think it's a good point to start with maybe Stuart from Roofings, who is really part of that underlying infrastructure. Before you get into the trade component, you need the industry and the manufacturer to make sure that you have the right products in place. I think it was in this very room that we had the launch of the National Industrial Strategy, again sponsored by UNDP. So I think, Stuart, the promise of the Continental Free Trade Area is something that I'm sure Roofings would be open to. You're a multinational country. It would be important for us to understand from you what is the balance between the opportunities that you're seeing on offer in the continent and the challenges for our government and other captains of industry to understand from your perspective. I hand over the floor to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, our moderator. Once again, welcome our Secretary General, and thank you to the government of Uganda to have organized this, of course, with the Chamber and other associates in line. We as Roofings, some people refer to us as steel magnets. We are very excited about the discussion that has been taking place, and we see that the opportunities are immense. If I come to the natural resources of Uganda alone, iron ore, if properly mined and value added, it can answer the question of industrialization that you are talking about. All these developed countries we have, Japan, China, Germany, UK, US, name it. Farming is a good thing to do. It employs the bigger population, yes. But if we are talking value addition that brings real value in terms of money, steel can do a great job to Uganda, to East Africa, and to the world. We need to ensure that industrialization is the way to go. Even if, for example, if I'm going to do a winery, my sister is here from Bella Wines, there's no way she's going to add value to wine without using some form of metal. Definitely, you need steel in whatever you are doing. But going away from our advantages, we are already spread. Of course, we are a Ugandan company, locally motivated. We are also East African because we are based in Mombasa and some offices in Nairobi, and having other trade partners within the East African region, Congo, Burundi, South Sudan, etc. But as well, we are already in Ghana, and we are striving to become a Continental brand, Roofings Africa Limited. So Secretary General, in all the documentation that you are going through, get rest assured that there's a company like Roofings which is ready to brand and blend with your ambitions. But talking to the audience, I would love to say, we have discussed, we have done research and development, we have so many things on our fingertips, we have the appetite to go the free Africa Continental Trade Area. Can we get out of the boardroom? Let's implement. In whatever level we are, I understand the minister is saying we should have organized trade, we should have a deliberate way of doing things the professional way, but we are taking too long in the boardroom. I'm requesting we get out of the boardroom and we do nothing but implementation, implementation, implementation. Lastly, the NTBs and other problems we've been having on the ESC level are not very different from the problems we would be facing with the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. We have done a lot of lobbying. My senior from UMA was saying this lobbying and talking to who knows who should get out of the way, and we have the business going, like the example he was using of an insurance company. Can we also see that this bureaucratic way of doing things, the red tape, is actually removed from what we are discussing? Other than the infrastructure, very good points. Connectivity, very good points. But there's another issue. The airlines are too expensive. But the mobile phone, how we communicate, how we are doing business, even when we are in this nearest Tanzania state to Uganda or Burundi, the cost of doing business on phone is very expensive. Can we look into the issue of where we can make some of these things become business friendly, become affordable, and the multiplier effect becomes a benefit for us? I thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. And I think it's music to our ears to have a manufacturer speak and not complain about electricity in Uganda. So applause to the government for investing in that infrastructure to make sure that the power costs are at least going down relative to a decade or so ago. Thank you, Stuart. I think the conversation about, maybe we can start adding to a wish list, because the digitalization conversation is mixed with mobile and computer telephony. So if the cost of that infrastructure is not up to par, as Stuart is saying, it becomes a little bit uncompetitive for a Pan-African steel company to operate. I think if we can maybe extend that conversation to the aspects of evacuation infrastructure. So when we talk non-tariff barriers, that belly of that A330 needs to carry goods. Do we have the airline? Do we have the routes? Do we have the railway? Do we have the road infrastructure to help us to cut across the continent at a cost that's manageable? And I guess the question to you, Mr. Kafero, when you deal with your membership in terms of logistics, transportation, and everything, and they want to go to Ghana, they want to go to DRC, is there some recurring complaints that come up that you think need to be addressed? On one hand, an uptick in that volume post-ratification of the Continental Free Trade Area. Over to you. You start now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Nicholas Kafero, and I'm happy to say that amongst the panelists, I'm the only one representing a solution-based industry, which is freight logistics. Previously, we used to be a service-based industry, but when COVID came into play, the world was still, and everyone was looking at we, the freight forwarders, we, the freight logisticians, to move the world. And that's how we got to brag about being the wheels of commerce, or the wheels of the economies. Challenges are there, but we wouldn't want to capitalize on these challenges. We look at them as opportunities. So if, let me say, there are quite so many non-tariff barriers, across borders, we have to look at partnerships. If there is something that the Continental Free Trade Area is teaching us as freight forwarders, there are quite 3 lessons that we learn, and I would start from the third, which is partnerships. Second, partnerships. Third, partnerships. We've taken partnerships to a whole new level in that we are now partnering with both our regulators and customers. We are doing what we call open book accounting, to something we could call open book accounting with our customers. We provide a solution to customers. If you get to realize, Stuart will tell you, sailing schedules have reduced internationally. And this goes about to the issue of container imbalance and the little seaborne traffic that we have as Africa in terms of import. So because we do not have a lot of containerized cargo coming in, we are advising the manufacturers to be in position to at least multiply the terms of voyages they're going to make to maybe the coast, either Mombasa or Dar es Salaam.
Just to understand, you're talking about inflows, imports?
Inflows, yes.
It's the containerized inflows have a bearing on how much we can take out?
Exactly.
Because
of the containers.
Okay.
Most of our exports are containers and not any other containers. There is what we call food grade containers.
We have roofings here.
Roofings barely exports in containers.
They could make containers. They could make containers.
It depends on the standard. I know they have the credibility. Maybe that's something they'll be able to venture into, but there is an international standard. So I was talking about partnerships, in that we are now advising our clients that instead of looking at transactional or the import times, look at the rates. How many times do you import? Do you have to reduce that? Instead of importing 10 times a month, could you consolidate all your orders and import once? So in that way, we are in a way trying to streamline our logistics and be able to match up something that is coming up, the balance of payments problem. It's so much because of the rate at which import. So partnerships is the way to go. And we're also partnering with the regulators, especially Uganda Revenue Authority. We as freight forwarders, we've taken it a notch higher. Like I told you, AFTA has brought about free mobility of factors of production. Labor is one of those. So you're going to have an influx of trained logisticians coming in. And we are not only leaving it at that, but we are training the industry on behalf of Uganda Revenue Authority. We have lots of training programs that we are undertaking. In that way, even if we say we are going to partner with someone from West Africa, it's basically the same standard.
Okay, sorry I have to cut you off there. So on our list right now, Honorable Minister, Your Excellency, we have the coastal communication, we have the solutions-based logistician talking about partnerships and a lack of containers. So it's important that we also keep within the manufacturing or industrial sector, specific to food. There was mention about a deficit of dairy products in the Nigerian market. And we have someone from the dairy industry with us. I want to understand, I'm going to reduce it now to two and a half minutes, just to unpack how you see the global opportunity, or the Pan-African opportunity, excuse me, particularly for a product that's perishable, it's dependent on standards, etc. How you viewing the opportunity landscape on the continent? Over to you, 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Joseph Awino, head of sales at Fresh Dairy. Just to give you an insight of who Fresh Dairy is, we are one of the largest dairy producers, manufacturers in Uganda. We do 2 brands. The mother brand is Fresh Dairy brand. The brand that follows is the Brookside brand. The milk sector in Uganda is very interesting with statistics. There's a lot of opportunity. I always tell people that Uganda can feed the whole of Africa with milk because the production stands at 2.8 billion liters per year. 2.8 billion liters. But domestic consumption is only 800 million liters.
That leaves us with a clean 2 billion liters to export. Ladies and gentlemen, this is enormous opportunity. Latest data, exports from milk gives us about $100 million per year. But there's a lot of opportunity. Through the efforts of the government, through the efforts of the Chamber of Commerce, we've been able to explore markets. I would gladly say here, the government representatives are aware, there's opportunity in Africa in terms of value addition. Just to beat my own drums, these are part of the products we export out. Value addition, this is powder.
Can I walk into a supermarket in Accra and see your products now? Or
That is where we are heading to, because first, the government has done a lot to boost production to the extent where we've reached the $2.8 billion, 2.8 billion liters. But to walk into Accra and find our products, it's about what kind of product are you looking for here. Currently, in export market, we focus more on value-added products, which is milk powder, fats, and fats here we are talking about ghee, which you would probably refer to as mzigo. We're talking about butter. So yes, in Accra you might not find our products, but these are the opportunities we are pursuing. Currently, through the government efforts, we are looking at $500 million worth of exports to Algeria, which is knocking on our doors. As processors, we are looking at, are we able to satisfy that demand? So there's a lot of opportunity in terms of milk and milk exports in Africa that we believe and trust that Uganda, with its unique climatic conditions, because we almost have rains throughout, we can be able to satisfy that market.
Thank you. 2 billion liters surplus. We really have to find a way of getting it into the supermarket shelves across the continent. And I guess the milk conversation in broad terms relates to our food opportunity. The previous speakers made reference to our arable land, our climate, our beauty. The food conversation relates to the opportunity that you're speaking. We have the logistics to evacuate it. We have the steel to build the factories, which means that on the tangible aspect of our trade, we've had all the bases covered. I'll come back to you. I just want to quickly sort of go to the service side of things. So tourism is a very interesting conversation. Everyone who comes here, be it in Kampala or across the country, will leave changed. Just a small anecdote to before I bring in Mr. Byarahanga, right? Byarugaba? Byarahanga. I was recently having a conversation with a few friends of mine about a music festival. So one of the largest Afrobeats festival in the world takes place in Portugal. It's called Afro Nation. And it draws in a lot of tourists from across the continent or the African diaspora into Portugal to celebrate our culture. That is slightly disturbing. And when we talk tourism, as Madame Elsie said, there's a component of that cultural aspect that we need to celebrate. There's a marketing aspect that we also need to enhance. My question, Mr. Byarugaba, is from the Association of Tour Operators, how are you leveraging the cultural and natural endowments that we have to attract the other African consumer? Be it something around a music festival or film, or to go to a national park within the auspices of a common free trade market. Your 2 minutes starts now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, tourism is always misunderstood, and he's even giving it 2 minutes. Anyway, I want to first thank the Secretary General for coming to Uganda. You're welcome. And I also thank Madame Olive Chigongo. The video was really talked about tourism, and it was touching on me. And of course, usually Elsa has always been part of tourism. She supports all initiatives. But when it comes to tourism, ladies and gentlemen, you know, you're all here, and one of the segments of tourism, MICE, you know, it's a connector. It's a relief, it's a stress reliever. African stresses can be relieved in tourism. It's a network, a medium where people can trade together. Now, to get into the question, Africa is known as a continent of opportunities. It's the next biggest travel destination. But we as Africans, do we know what we have? Do we really take stock of what we have that can attract ourselves to different countries? Can we identify buyers? What do the West Africans love to see? What do the East Africans love to see? What about South Africans? What about people who live in the desert? What do they want to see? So that we're able to package them, identify buyers and sellers in our continent, and be able to sell to each other. I came this morning from Mombasa. Our ambassador, our consular general in Mombasa, identified this gray area, and he actually invited the tour operators. We went and had a very fruitful conversation with the business community there. Very soon we are signing MOUs with the tour operators the other side. Can we do it in other parts of the continent so that we're able to know each other? He's just talked about, can we do it? The only people to do it is identifying the players. Let's get out of the boardroom. Identify the players. I will show you down here that you may not even know that there are associations which are based on African continent, African tour operators, African air operators, the Federation of African Tourist Guide Association based in West Africa. They are already connecting to East Africa. Once we have the players and you facilitate the synergies, Madam Elsie, this is an area where you probably have interest. Facilitate the synergies, those associations, because they are businessmen, they are already there. It will make life easier for you so that you're able to do business together. Now, he's talking about culture. 4 years ago, I was in the United States and I found a cultural festival. Who was there? West Africa. And I said, but what about East Africa? And someone told me, but East Africa doesn't want to connect. I said, no. The best solution is let us connect with West Africans. We have similar packages, similar culture, although some differences are there, and sell it together. Now, you talked about involvement of women and youth. We involve them to do what? In what areas? In tourism, we have so many packages that you can package together. In Uganda, for example, we are going to host the first ever international conference for women bird watchers. It's coming to Uganda in December. Women are traveling from all over the world to come and watch birds in Uganda for the first time. But I can tell you, as a secret, people from outside Africa have been saying, but Uganda cannot afford to host this conference. I told them, no. It's actually, sometimes I lied to them. It is backed by PSFU, government of Uganda, UNDP, MasterCard, everybody's backing it up. So they backed off, knowing that it's actually strong. But why should they come and say you can't host it? Yet we have the biggest biggest population of birds on the whole world. So it's a question of getting people to do what's supposed to be done, identify niches that can attract ourselves. You know, culture, you can never satisfy culture, never. You can never satisfy culture. And
can I?
Yes, okay.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
We'll come back, so because we're running out of time. But I think what you, and I forgot to really celebrate the video that was played that celebrates our tourism. But what's interesting is the bird watchers tend to be at a bit of a premium in terms of average spend, from what I understand. And what Mr. Stephen Asimwe said is that when you come as a visitor, even if you're coming as a tourist, you may be compelled to come back as an investor. And that's something that the tourism is the only industry that can really balance many facets of industry or investment. Now, Mr. Kafero introduced himself as the only solutions person on the panel. I beg to differ because I saved the best for the last. Every time there's a finance person on a panel, all eyes are focused on him, and I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Emeka. From your surname, I believe you're from West Africa somewhere, Nigeria. Welcome to Kampala.
Thank you.
There was multiple references to the Afrexim Bank. I want to catch on two key points. The first one really was about the ability to provide a marketplace effectively for inter-African trade. And then the other dimension, I think there was a mention of the smaller businesses. Someone said Afrexim does not cater to those smaller businesses who are 90% of our private sector. And I think the third aspect was effectively, everyone knows that if you're trading inter-African, instead of having a cross-currency between Naira and UGX, we have to go dollar, euro, or whatever else, and you're providing solutions in that respect. We don't know when that's going to happen per the position paper, but there's a few people who are curious to know about how Afreximbank, what role do you have in facilitating the private sector to access this market, particularly within the context of the smaller and medium-sized enterprises that populate the majority of businesses in this country?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good evening, colleagues. Your Excellency, good evening, honorable ministers, presidents, and Madam President, and all the other officials. I think I'm happy to be sitting here and have this opportunity to explain a little bit about what Afreximbank does. But I think it's my setup day, because I was never told I was going to sit at a panel. And then the last gentleman, read that long list of accusations around Afreximbank. But it's really unfortunate. I wanted to engage him. I've gotten a copy of his speech, so I can have a session with him and probably with the larger audience to really explain what Afreximbank is doing. The truth is that there are different types of banks, right? So we have the development bank that Afreximbank is. We have investment banks. We have commercial banks. We have merchant banks. We have local microfinance banks. One banking institution cannot play these roles all by itself. If Afrexim catered to every SME on the streets of Uganda, what do you think will happen to your small microfinance institutions and your local commercial banks and merchant banks? So we have a niche, and given our mandates, we are set up to be the Trade Finance Bank of Africa and play a complementary role. Our strategy is that where any local institution can play that role, we don't compete there. What we want is actually to enable not just trade, but also the local financial institutions, right? So today, we are supporting SMEs, but mostly indirectly. So most of the SMEs don't know, right? Today, we have relationship with almost 500, in fact, 480 to be exact, of the 600 regulated banks in Africa, through which we provide on-lending facilities, provide guarantees. So when you go to your local banks here in Uganda, most of the facilities you're enjoying from them are actually being supported and being funded by Afreximbank. Right. And I'm sitting down here, all my fellow panelists, I can speak to each and every point each of them has made, from the manufacturer to the tourism promoter to the gentleman, the solutions provider, to logistics, all of them. And Afreximbank has programs for all this. If we sit here to discuss all Afreximbank is doing to enable trade, to be honest, we won't live here. So what I probably will do is to arrange a special session with Madam, if she will agree, and I bring some of my other colleagues, and we come here and spend half a day, or even a full day, and tell you what Afreximbank is doing. And the good thing is that we have a local office, 1 out of the 5, here in Harare. You're talking about PAPs. You're talking about eliminating the need for foreign currency to initiate trade. We all know how difficult it is to source foreign currency all over Africa. It's not just in Uganda. Imagine an SME who is producing dairy products, right? Who, because of the AFC Secretariat or AFC FTA markets, one market in Africa, now has clients in Ghana, CD, clients in Nigeria, Naira, clients in South Africa, Rand. For him to ship to all these places, he will have to set up a treasury to do with all the several currencies. We have 42 currencies in Africa. It is impossible for a small business to do it. And Afreximbank, working with the Secretariat, has introduced the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System to completely eliminate that risk. You sell and you receive your... And the gentleman made a mention that it's taking so long, when is it going to be functional? It is actually functional. Transactions have been done and settled in local currencies on PAPs, and it's going on. What we need to do is that we should ask ourselves, why is it not functional in Uganda? And then we can also have this discussion outside this area and see how we can incentivize the Ugandan Central Bank to sign on to PAPs and open up the infrastructure to local Ugandan banks.
Can This is music to everyone's ears, I suppose. And we have an action point from this convening. And Honorable Minister and Your Excellency, Madam President, Madam Atafua, when you can give us permission, we would like to gather around with a central conversation about what Afrixim means for the Ugandan enterprise. Because I think what's being unpacked here is that there's an understanding of the solutions, yet the solutions buffet works for every sector. So I'm asking your permission to include this as an action point. We may need to have some of your colleagues in Cairo or from the Secretariat in Accra to join in. But these are things that I think panels like this need to come out with. And certainly the Chamber of Commerce would have other members present who would want to be party to this conversation and understand what you have. So I hope I can get a secondment on that proposal. And with that, one of the problems that moderators have sometimes is assume that they have all the questions and dominate the microphone. So with your permission, I'd like to invoke the co-moderators that I have in the room to engage. And I would like for us to start with a few women, just to make sure that we balance this boat effectively. So I'd like to have 2-3 questions from...
Sorry, Moderator, I'm sorry to interject. You didn't even give me my 2 minutes, so I didn't answer your 3 questions.
It's coming back to you. I mean, because the reason why I think is that what you have, we don't have the time to, but we have decided that there's going to be a very specific half-day conversation. But I'm sure there'll be questions coming to you. So, Mr. MC, if we're in agreement, can we have a couple of women, ladies in the room? There's one right behind you.
All right, I think we'll allow just for 2 questions. I have a lady here, and Professor Piwang already has a question there. So we keep it short and simple.
Let's keep it quick. 1 question, introduce yourself, your company, and who you're directing the question to. If it's a comment, please share the comment. Thank you.
I'm the CEO of Better Wines and Juices, the best in the whole world. They are there. So I'm disappointed there's no time, because this is a very big opportunity for me, for my problem to be solved, because the market are here who would solve my problems. But the most important thing, I want to tell you that I have been with the Bera for 23 years. The journey has been wrong, but now I'm tired of marketing it alone, yet it is Ugandans who are benefiting. Everyone in this room is my witness. I have that table, the high table. They have seen me struggling from day one. It is very, very hard to market in another country by yourself. It's Madam Olive, you are the president of Chamber of Commerce. We have met in every country. She sees how hard it is to penetrate a market on your own, but I have done it. When South Africa recently, you saw me with the president of South Africa. It is amazing, but it's so much disappointing that you cannot get it in any hotels here, in these big supermarkets. And even taking it to South Africa, to Italy, I was with him in Vietnam, it's hard, especially like these dedicated products, like my bottles. And I have that best juice. Yeah, I was given an award from Malaysia. For them, they don't listen to my poko poko. They take to their laboratories and test. Ugandans, why don't you? Minister of Trade, why don't you test from the laboratories? Even if you don't trust UNBS, test it and know that the best products. Because what we are doing, we are promoting Uganda, not me. Now, I think Stephen, the CEO of ED of private sector, is so much worried. You talked about coffee. Tomorrow you are going to see Mzungu buying here matunda, which I'm processing, making wine, because I changed the whole world, that wine is not only from grapes. They are going to buy you, to bring you wine from the matunda you produce from here, and you buy it expensive because it's from out. But when you see better, look at this bottle. How smart it is. I go abroad and make this. I brought a Mzungu to make it. But still our mind is set. We don't promote each other. Why don't you take trouble to get products, to know products which are good? Because I have talked and talked, And the point has not, I thank you so much, Stephen. Those who have tried to really to promote me, some churches have started using it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some samples of the juice if you want to physically test so that we can promote. Allow me just, okay, he already has. That was more of a comment and a cry for support.
My name is George Piwang Jolobo. I represent the Chamber of Commerce on the Great Lakes Private Sector Forum Investment and Trade Conference, which is supposed to take place in Kigali. There was a contribution from the private sector which was missed in terms of opportunities presented by FCTA. We went more into the challenges. Chamber of Commerce of Uganda has proposed creation of cross-border special economic zones in Uganda. One in West Nile with DRC Ituri province. The other one is in Kasese with North Kivu. Another one in Kitgum district with South Sudan. Another one in Karamoja with Turkana in Kenya. These are proposals by the Chamber of Commerce private sector for marketing at the Great Lakes Investment and Trade Conference that is coming this year in Kigali, where I represent the Chamber of Commerce. Your Excellency, Wemukele, I follow you. You're the best preacher for FCTA, except Madame Elsie Atafoa, who is as great a preacher of FCTA. The cross-border special economic zones the Chamber of Commerce has proposed is a game changer for FCTA implementation. Next, we also missed innovation in Uganda through the Kira Motors Corporation that has innovated and produced Africa's fully electric bus. By end of this year, the Kira assembly plant should be on because they're now working on their production system. What that has done has opened a market for electric vehicle battery manufacture in Uganda. In Kitgum district, northern Uganda, some of us Ugandans may not know where Kitgum is. There are 2 billion tons of graphite deposits. That has been licensed by our Ministry of Energy, Mineral Development and Energy, to Glencore Resources, a UK mining company which is listed on the stock exchange. The report they released last year, according to Deep Earth International publication, that the graphite deposits in Kitgum is the best world-class grade of graphite. And so this company is starting marketing this year, according to the report. And listen to what they said. They want to be a big-time African player in the battery market. A UK company wants to be a big-time African player in the battery market in Uganda, in Kitgum, northern Uganda. They've also brought up the interest of SIPA Resources in copper, nickel, also in Kitgum. So we have opportunities as Uganda, presented by the African Continental Trade Area, and Chamber of Commerce has documented this. I just want to add that because it was missed.
Thank you.
Coffee is not the only thing. Big time electric vehicle is coming for Uganda and battery manufacture. Thank you.
Professor Piwang, there's a quick response here from Afrixim. And then we'll go to, I don't know how much time we have, Blessing, left.
We have just one last question.
Yeah, can we have a quick response here?
Okay. Just very quickly, you know, if you don't produce, you don't trade, right? And it's good, Professor, you mentioned cross-border free trade zones, right? And because it's a very quick response, Afrexim Bank, working with UNECA and a couple of other partners, actually studying how to build one of those Zambia, DRC border. The top 5 lithium producing countries in the world are in Africa. And we know that lithium is the metal of the future. Because, I mean, there is no other way automotive sector is going to excel to electronic vehicles. So we don't want the Western world like they had done previously to come and mine our lithium, take it out there, build the Teslas. So that's why we're already building a special economic zone for lithium around the border between Zambia and DRC. And we are building also a special economic zone inside Zambia for copper processing. Because of the harnesses and the cables and all in an automotive, in a car, it's all made of copper. So this is also one of the things Afrexim Bank is doing today. We invested more than $1 billion in building special economic zones and industrial parks in at least 11 countries in Africa.
Okay.
Uganda, that's no reason why Uganda should also not initiate one, and we will be very willing to work, with Uganda.
And I think it's fortuitous that the Honorable Minister with us is specifically in charge of economic zones and industrial parks. So we need to really progress this conversation when we convene next. I am conscious of time.
Yes, we have many questions, but we only have time to take one last one.
I was hoping for a lady. There's a lady there. We cannot.
Mine is a comment, so the lady can take the chance. It's not a question that thanks. I'm Mwine Jim Kaveho, Madvan Group, and Chairman East Africa Sugar Association and Chairman Uganda Sugar Manufacturers Association. My comment is we need to meet more. We are not meeting both on regional level or bilateral, so that we meet with lists. I'm glad Jakor is here. Thank you very much. He used to be in our industry. So we come with the lists of those who can now export. We meet and discuss that. There is a committee on the Continental Trade Area for Uganda. We are not meeting with the private sector. So somebody said pattern. Me, I'm saying we meet then pattern, either regionally or bilaterally. I'm happy this meeting is taking place. We are not meeting, Mr. Honorable Minister Mwebese.
All right, we'll have a...
Thank you, Chair. Just from the action point, and this goes to UNDP, Madam Atafua, we need to convene a little bit more. Maybe not in as fancy a location. There's space at the Chamber of Commerce, there's space at PSFU. We can do it digitally, but a recurring engagement to make sure that these conversations are fluid, they don't stop, and then we pick it up from 6 months' time. So, Blessing, please take note of that. Madam?
Okay, my name is Rhoda Tomusime. I'm the chairperson, Chamber of Commerce in Entebbe. Now, my point 1 or 2, one is how are we poised to tackle the challenge of our literal dollar, literal forex hemorrhage which goes out? Have you done an assessment, an evaluation of what Africa is bringing in from outside, so that the strategic investments which we are trying to do are reducing our dollar which goes out, our forex which goes out? Are we focused in that area? Now, the second point is about, I know you told me one, is about transport. Many of you have talked about the importance of transport, intercontinental or interconnectivity. Now, the African Union had a program of PIDA. PIDA is a program for infrastructure development in Africa. Unless we have a coordinated, well-structured approach which is going to help take stock what the RECs are doing, so that the RECs can be able to kind of go into FTA, so that we get this intercontinental connectivity. Unless we connect, definitely it will be difficult. Of course, you can through digitalization, but you cannot unless you can move train, railways, and all that. So a structured approach, Your Excellency, I think you need to push that one, but also maybe they can tell us what is being done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we are closing, but there's a youth representative that is holding me by the neck.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted, when my neighbor talked about her frustration with the limited confidence in local content, I felt the need to add my voice and maybe ask the gentleman from the Afri-Exim Bank to expound about factoring, one of the products that Afri-Exim Bank has that is a very big opportunity for entrepreneurs like us when it comes to trading on the African Continental Free Trade
Thank you.
area. If at all he can expound on factoring so that the entrepreneurs in this room can leverage on that opportunity.
Thank you. We're going to wrap up now, and I think what I'll do, if it's okay with everyone, we'll end with Afri-Exim, but can we have 1 minute for each of my panelists, just having had content from my co-moderators. I'll start with you, Mr. Awino. Your reflections. You're going to answer that first. We'll come back to you.
Once more, thank you. I think for me, from the dairy sector, is for us to drive the 2 billion liters. Challenges are there, but we look at these challenges as opportunities. As Fresh Dairy, we are ready. We are working with the government to ensure that these $100 million per year, we double it to $200 million and improve the livelihoods of the Ugandans throughout the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Your neighbor, logistics.
Thank you very much. So all we need to do is we need to optimize regional trade. We have to appreciate that the community is now coast to coast, which is from Far East to the other side of with DRC coming into play. So we need to find ways on how we are going to harmonize policies, because so many of us are talking about infrastructure, but in logistics, infrastructure is basically soft infrastructure. How have you streamlined the logistics in terms of systems and processes? That's the only way we are going to achieve in terms of.
Thank you. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, Your Excellency, and colleagues, I really want to see the first thing we should work on to enable, to facilitate travel across the continents. Let's have visa conditions eased. Why should I suffer to go to South Africa, to go to West Africa, to come here? Let's deal with visas. Let's deal with air travel. Remove the taxes and make it easier for people to travel. When we travel, we invest, and that's very, very important for me. Then what she said, interstate roads, and then we shall discover what we should be able to do, build capacities together, identify new products, new hotels, new investment opportunities across the continent. We shall make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stuart, man of steel.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will still emphasize on steel. All the countries in Africa naturally have something underground, the minerals. We need to exploit these minerals. That's where the money is. And what am I saying? Partnerships. Let's try to take advantage of partnerships. If South Africa is very good at value addition on iron ore, can we have partnership and do the same in Uganda? If it is to do with gold, say in Congo, what can we do? Hardwood, these forests, yes, we are very particular about degrading the environment. Yes, we don't want to cut the tree, but it is still something that can bring economic growth within Africa, and there are a lot of opportunities in some of the forests that we have. How can we make sure that when we get the hardwood, say from Congo, we add value and trade amongst ourselves in order to sell the products that are coming from something like to do with the forest.
Thank you.
But the minerals are vast, and I believe we can do much more if we take advantage of partnerships. Thank you very much.
I'll give you. So the money man, with our solutions, I'm going to give him an extra 30 seconds because there's a question for him. Your final remarks, sir.
Okay, like I said, I think we will organize a session to talk about what Afri-Exim Bank is doing to facilitate trade. But what I want to do, I took some notes, while all the other speakers were making their statements, to answer some of the specific questions that were raised so that people don't go out of here without responses to their concerns. Let me start with my fellow panelists. With steel, you're looking for partnership. You should come and partner with Afri-Exim Bank. because we have a program we call Intra-African Champions, Intra-Champs for short. Because of our mandate covers the entire continent, we know people who have done well everywhere that you may not have access to. So there might be an Egyptian manufacturer who is buying steel from China, who will be more than willing to matchmake you, and do training. So we can discuss that here. Talking about logistics, I'm sure it will be music to your ears that we are planning to take care of your headaches at the borders. For example, I'm working with the Secretariat is developing a Continental Transit Guarantee Scheme that with one customs bond, you can move your products from Cairo to Cape Town. You don't need to stop at every border to get a national surety to issue a guarantee because you're transiting. So in Uganda, maybe not for your imports because you import from Mozambique, from Kenya, from one country. Imagine if you're shipping to South Africa, dairy product, and you have to buy guarantees at every of the 5 countries. For perishable goods, it can work. So we are going to, and it's be operational this year. With one guarantee, single customs bond, you move across anywhere in Africa. For my gentleman that's looking for capacity to absorb the $100 million, we'll be more than willing to work with you. Like I mentioned, we have clients elsewhere. We'll do connectivity with you. We will finance expansion projects, and we'll find you the markets. We're working with the Secretary as well. We have the Intra-African Trade Fair. That's a marketplace for AFCFTA, where you come 3, 4, 5 days, you see the last time we had it in Cape Town, there were 30,000 visitors, and transactions worth $42 billion were sealed in 1 week. You can't have it better. Rather than going to several countries looking for markets, you come one place and you meet everybody you want to meet in one place, and you get your deals going. The gentleman from private sector talked to us about benefits the Chinese exporters have because the Chinese government has a way of de-risking trade. We are already de-risking investment and trade in Africa. We have specific country guarantees or investment guarantees that will protect you if you want to go and do business in South Sudan. Because our mandate gives us a special creditor status that the risk you can't face in South Sudan, we can take that risk. And we assure you, you just come and buy that protection. We sell it to you, and you're covered. If you do business and you can't repatriate your capital or your profit, Afrexim Bank will take care of you, and we face Sudan. And it's available everywhere. Madam talked about branding. In fact, we have a product that will have designs for SMEs that will call How to Export under AFCFTA. It's a 4-day training program that takes you through your production, your marketing, your branding, your selling, everything an SME, smallholder producer needs to do to penetrate the market. Because we have opened up this market through the AFCFTA, right? If you don't do it right and you don't take the advantage, so towards end, I can go on and on and on, but I think...
I don't have the power to call another convention, but I'll yield to our seniors. But before I wrap up and thank you, there was just a comment from Professor Piwang on the export processing zones.
I'm sorry, I forgot about the
lady on
factoring. I think that's very important for her.
Please.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
So factoring is also very important. It's one of the products we are driving at Afrexim Bank. In fact, Afrexim Bank is the chair of the Factors Union in Africa. And what we found that factoring has been used so successfully elsewhere, but Africa was only contributing 1.5% of the international factoring volume. So we took it upon among ourselves to do very active advisory, and advocacy to African governments to establish factoring laws because it was non-existent. So today we have been able to get a consultant, develop a model factoring law, and we have had that factoring law now adopted and domesticated in 8 African countries.
Yeah.
We haven't stopped there. We are still moving on, and our joy would be the day it's continentally adopted so that...
We can go on, and I think my panelists, please do not take me to court for allocating the money man more time, but it tends to be this way. And to be honest, it's been very informative from all my panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And there'll be other conversations over dinner, another informal, but we will come back at some point, maybe not too fancy a venue, to unpack these things and have the wider membership of both the chamber, PSFU, representatives from government, et cetera, to unpack this. Thank you very much. Over GMC.
Thank you very much. Let's give it up for David and his team of absolutely amazing panelists that were equal to the task. We're a little bit hard pressed on time, and I'll make haste in inviting our next speaker just to come and give a wrap up of this session. She is the Secretary General, UNCCI, Madame Owomjisha B. Immaculate, and I'll ask her to do me the honors of inviting the Minister, who will in turn invite His Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rooney. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's so much better. I'm not going to take a lot of time. Please allow me adopt the protocol as it has been used before. My job is really very simple. I'm just going to use probably 2 minutes to just give a wrap-up, a private sector wrap-up of today's engagement. I will highlight a few challenges that have been identified by both the people that did the position paper and also our panel discussion, but also on the proposed interventions. This could be by the private sector and also by the government, but largely to the Secretariat. Some of the challenges that have been highlighted include there's continued traffic barriers, non-tariff barriers, and there's also inadequate service sector regulatory framework that we have. There's lack of information, or there's lack of awareness of the information. Maybe the information is there, but we need to create a lot more visibility and awareness that is required. There's also a challenge of infrastructural bottlenecks that have been highlighted. Financing has been ably talked about. I know that AfriExim has provided us quite a number of products, but as here in Uganda, we are still facing it as a major challenge. So we will take on AfriExim Bank with the products that they have provided. There's also a challenge of standard compliance, that is in terms of course, quality and quantity, and also being able to harmonize the different standards that are required across the different countries. There's a lot of challenge in the cost of communication. Of course, there are proposed interventions that have been given. The first one being the transcontinental infrastructure projects. That means the road networks, the air networks, among others, railways, name it but a few. There's also a requirement of skilling and capacity of lead enterprises to be able to improve the quality in standard. There's also need to invest in research and development. There's a lot of research that is required for us to improve the standards that we're looking at. We also need to also invest in market research. Where is the market? Where are we taking our commodities? How are we accessing these markets? What are our cooperative advantage? And how can we benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area? There's need to also strengthen the value chains that we have from the grassroots level to the exportation level. We need to also improve or give a robust policy advocacy for us to be able to create an enabling environment for trade. We need to create special economic zones and, of course, robust trade information portal as highlighted. But like everyone has emphasized, there's great need for us to create a roadmap for private sector engagement in the development and the implementation of the National African Continental Free Trade Area Implementation Strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to invite the Minister of Trade, Cooperatives and Industries, Honorable Francis Mwebesa, to officially invite the guest of honor.
At this juncture, I would like to welcome His Excellency Wamakele Meni to come and make his official statement. Please.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, Minister for Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, Minister Mwebesa, State Minister, Honorable Fred Gumengobi, the chairperson of the Presidential CEO Forum in her absence, the chairperson of the Ugandan Manufacturers Association, CEO of Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, President of Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Her Excellency Mama Lulu Ngwana, and of course our co-convener, Madam Elsie Atefua, UNDP resident rep, leaders of business, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be with you again here in Kampala. I was here last year and we committed to come back for another discussion on the implementation of the AFCFTA. So I want to congratulate the organizers of this event, and I want to join the Minister in thanking the UNDP and in particular Madam Atefua for convening us here. I think it's very important that we continue to engage the private sector. As I noted before, it is not governments that trade, it is the private sector that trades, and so we have to work together to unlock the opportunities for the private sector to boost intra-Africa trade. I want to thank you, Honorable Minister, for being here with us. I know that today you had a cabinet meeting, and yet you stepped out of that meeting to attend this session with us, and that is, to me, a signal of the commitment that yourself and the government has in respect of the AFCFTA. Let me also commend Uganda's private sector, the Presidential CEO Forum, the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, the Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Uganda Manufacturers Association, small medium enterprises that are here with us today, for engaging with the AFCFTA and identifying the opportunities that exist. We often say that, and we reiterated it today, and it is true, that there are many challenges in our continent. I want to underscore the point that Professor made. And I promise you we did not coordinate our positions on this. Africa's challenges are Africa's opportunities. And I will underscore, to underscore this point, I'll make just a few examples. The first example, I visited a factory in Lesotho. They manufacture car seats that are exported to other parts of the world through the value chain, the auto value chain of South Africa. They require something that they call a wiring harness to make the seat complete. The copper to make the wiring harness comes from Zambia and perhaps DRC also, southern part of DRC. their production was disrupted for about 4 to 5 months when the current geopolitical context that we're in, when it started. Now, copper comes from Zambia, is exported unprocessed to Ukraine. Ukraine processes the copper, a wiring harness is produced and is exported back to Southern Africa. That is an opportunity for the African continent. And that's why the points that were being made about the productive capacity of the African continent are so critical. And that is why the partnership with Afreximbank is so critical, because the productive capacity has to be financed by somebody. The manufacturing capacity has to be financed by somebody. The capital that is required to enhance and boost Africa's productive capacity is significant. It's an opportunity. I have never been to Ukraine. I have nothing against Ukraine, but I do believe that it is important that we process the copper in Africa instead of processing copper into wiring harnesses in another part of the world. The second example I would make that also underscores this point is again related to imports. 1.3 billion Africans relying for their food security on grains imports that come from another part of the world. 1.3 billion people. When correctly so, the paper that was presented informs us that we have over 60% of the world's arable land. So we rely on a country of 43 million people for Africa's food security, to feed Africa. Part of the problem that we are facing is, for so long, for over 65 years, we have had this fragmentation of the rules that actually prohibited intra-Africa trade in basic agricultural products. So that the $2 billion, 2 billion liters excess milk, the rules that existed over the last 65 years prohibit access of Ugandan milk in a market in West Africa, in Central Africa, North Africa, and so on. So now the AFCFTA, we have to use it as a tool to eliminate that prohibition of Ugandan milk into Nigeria, Ghana, any other market. I work for you, so I'm not going to speak for others, for other parts of the world. But we must displace milk from other parts of the world that comes into Africa. It is, if we did not focus on that, I would be failing you as somebody who is in this position to serve you. So we've got to make sure that we use the rules of the AFCFTA to create an integrated market for our products, for our services as Africans. And I remain unapologetic about this. We cannot have agricultural products from other parts of the world available at much better rates, preferences on the African continent. It was really an anomaly that for so long we had, if you are exporting from Uganda to North Africa or Central Africa or West Africa, your goods, your services, you were trading on what we call MFN rules, or global rules of trade. The product that you export is competing with the products or services of a third country. That's an anomaly. We should, as a continent, provide one another with preferential treatment so that this market of 1.3 billion people eventually becomes globally competitive. If we allow the AFCFTA to be a launch pad for others, we will not succeed. So the regionalism, the Pan-African market that we are creating must be primarily for African goods, services, and products. Not for a moment am I suggesting that goods, services from other parts of the world will not be allowed into the market. No, I wish not to be misunderstood. But the preferential terms is what we must focus on for goods produced in Africa. Zimbabwe has in excess of 200,000 metric tons of excess grains per year. Yet we import grains from other parts of the world. Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, these are countries that are well positioned to be net exporters of grains for the entire continent. Again, here is an opportunity for us as Africans to feed ourselves, to ensure food security in Africa, and to ensure competitiveness of our agricultural products. These are just some of the examples of the challenges that are also opportunities, where we create an integrated market for investment, encourage value chains to drive intra-Africa trade. The challenges, of course, are going to be there. We all know that, including instability, a coup d'etat here, a coup d'etat there, a man waking up, and I'm saying a man, it's always a man waking up deciding he wants to overthrow an elected government, causing instability, shutting out the market along the borders, and the people that suffer are the informal traders, small medium enterprises that are led by women when there's that market that is shut out. These challenges will remain with us. But we have to continue to forge ahead with the implementation of the AFCFTA. This morning I visited, and here I'm making a third example of an opportunity that arises from a challenge. I visited this morning the Quality CIPLA, Quality Chemicals, and I was able to see firsthand not just potential global competitiveness, but where all things are equal, global competitiveness that already exists. Producing 130 million tablets per month, meeting not only domestic demand, but demand for the countries that they are already exporting to. In 2019, $16 billion worth of imports of pharmaceutical products. $16 billion. So you can imagine if a company like CIPLA or others around the continent, if we create a truly continental value chain for the export, intra-Africa trade of pharmaceutical products, not only for the purpose of meeting the public health imperatives of the African continent, which is and should be the primary objective, but also for innovation, creating jobs, and driving industrialization in Africa. That is why, as a secretariat, we're working very, very closely with the private sector to develop this export capacity for pharmaceuticals. And today we had a very good discussion with the chairman and the CEO about exactly what it is that still has to be done to enhance opportunities for the pharmaceutical sector in the AFCFTA, so that $16 billion, where we implement an appropriately tailored import substitution strategy, that $16 billion remains here in Uganda, in Africa, creating jobs here in Uganda and in Africa. And we know this far too well. We were, as was noted earlier, we were at the back of the queue in 2020. We were at the back of the queue for vaccine acquisitions. We were at the back of the queue for germ-killing products that were required to fight the pandemic. As a matter of fact, even when it came to the availability of the oxygen tanks that were required, we were at the back of the queue as a continent. And so we must think as Africans about what lessons do we draw from COVID-19 from a trade point of view. And I want to suggest, as I have in the past, that if we do not establish our own supply chain networks and our own value chains, when there is yet another global disruption of the global supply chains, we will again be at the back of the queue for whatever is required to overcome that challenge. So for us to strengthen the pharmaceutical sector, agriculture and agro-processing, we must leverage on the rules of the AFCFTA to enable the establishment of a truly regional or continental pharmaceuticals company, automotive company. I'm very happy to hear that Uganda is producing batteries. That the next challenge will be, how do we make sure that the batteries that are produced in Uganda become part of the value chain for electric vehicles and the value chain of the auto sector that connects Kenya, South Africa, Morocco, and any other leading producer or in the automotive sector. I've mentioned agriculture and the importance of agriculture in unlocking the benefits of a free trade area. Uganda is very well positioned to benefit from the AFCFTA. We've discussed pharmaceuticals. Today I heard and learned with great satisfaction that there's potential also in the automotive sector value chain, particularly batteries. This is important because, as was noted, the world is transitioning from combustion engines to electric vehicles. Who are potentially the drivers of the global auto sector in the next 20 to 30 years? It is going to be those countries that are able to produce the components that are required to power electric vehicles. So our continent is very, very well positioned in the next decade, 2 decades, to really be at the cutting edge of the global auto sector through the components and the manufacturing of the components that are required. where are we on the implementation of the AFCFTA? The last time I was here, I reported to you that we are in the process. At that time, we were in the process of negotiating 3 protocols. I'm happy to report to you that between October last year when I was here and now, those 3 protocols have been concluded. The protocol on competition, the protocol on investment, protection and facilitation, and the protocol on intellectual property rights are the 3 protocols that were adopted by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, having been negotiated by Ministers of Trade, were adopted in February this year during the 36th session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. We are also recording very good progress in the area of rules of origin. Close to 5,000 products that we trade in Africa. We have reached convergence on 88.3%, where we now have a single manual for rules of origin, so that you as an economic operator, you click on our website, you identify your product, the same rule of origin applies across the 47 countries who have ratified this agreement. Whereas before the AFCFTA, your export burden was that you would have to comply with rules of origin of either each country or each customs union, depending on where you were exporting to. You now will have to comply with only one set of rules of origin to reach a new market outside of the East African community. This is a significant achievement, not only from the point of view of trade, but also from the point of view of industrial development. Because the rules of origin that we have negotiated, the threshold for local content is very, very high. The value addition that is required to say this is made in the AFCFTA is very, very high. It is high because we do not want someone to import a shirt from another part of the world, put a button on it, and say made in the AFCFTA. We want to see and we want to foster industrialization in Africa, to create jobs in Africa. And so I am very happy that the Assembly of Heads of States and Government adopted the rules of origin that the Ministers of Trade negotiated, and those rules of origin are now operational. Also, since I was last here, in October last year, we have operationalized the dispute settlement body mechanism. For the first time in the history of our continent, we will resolve our trade, investment, competition disputes in accordance with the rules that we as Africans have negotiated to apply to us. And so, in February this year, the heads of states adopted and approved the appointment of 5 members of the appellate body as a last step of operationalization of the protocol on dispute settlement of the AFCFTA. This is important not only for market certainty and predictability, but it's important also from the point of view of asserting the rule of trade law in Africa and ensuring that your investments, your exports are protected as you export either capital or goods or services across the African continent. We have operationalized the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. As you would have heard from our partner, Afreximbank, trading is happening based on the platform. But what is required is for every central bank of every country to provide authorization for commercial banks in that country to switch onto the platform so that the trade can happen. Again, it was an anomaly that when two African countries are trading, they use a third currency. Think about it. Two African countries, in East Africa, in West Africa, your small medium enterprise wants to export, has to pay to use a third currency for trade in Africa. So with the introduction of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, we are completely eliminating that anomaly. You are now in a position to trade in local currency using a digital platform that will be instantaneous and that will ensure that you as a small medium enterprise are competitive, the cost of trade is reduced, and we make trade more accessible and more affordable to millions and millions of Africans across our continent. The last element, which I would have hoped that I would be in a position to report positively to you about, but we are concluding it by July. You can see I try to give myself less than a year to do everything so that we see results. The last area that I would like to mention, which is critical, is digitization of trade. We are working very closely with Afrexim Bank to establish what we refer to as the Africa Trade Gateway, the AFCFTA Trade Gateway, which is a digital platform that will provide connectivity of small medium enterprises, entrepreneurs, provide you with information related to the market that you want to explore, customs procedures that are applicable in that market, due diligence information, and as I mentioned, payments and matchmaking of small medium enterprises to enable a digitalized system of trade in Africa to take off. I'm hoping that by the end of the year we will conclude in setting up this tool for trade in Africa. So these are some of the things that we have done. Not things that we are talking about, things that we have done since I was here in Uganda. We have to have a sense of urgency because we are 65 years behind. We have no time to waste. That is why the Secretariat, small team as it is, most people in the Secretariat are overworked. But when you are exhausted and you think about the challenges and you think about how far behind our continent is, you can't afford to be tired because of the challenges. We shall continue to forge ahead under the leadership of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government to make sure that by the year 2035, we double intra-Africa trade with all of the challenges that shall remain. But we have to make sure that we do not measure success only in terms of trade flows that will have been improved by the year 2035. We will have to make sure that in addition to these instruments that I've spoken about, we will have to make sure that at the center of our trade agreement is development and inclusion. That is why of the the 2 remaining protocols, which we will conclude by June, the protocol on digital trade and the protocol on women and youth in trade, they are both aimed at ensuring that there is inclusivity in the benefits as well as inclusivity in the implementation of this agreement. And I'm very happy that last year in September, Her Excellency President Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan hosted the very first of its kind Women and Youth in Trade Conference in the United Republic of Tanzania, where we were tackling this very specific challenge of barriers to trade for young entrepreneurs, for small medium enterprises that are led by women. Small medium enterprises in Africa create over 450 million jobs and contribute close to 60% to Africa's GDP. So we have a particular responsibility to make sure that as we implement the trade agreement, that it is not only the large corporations that benefit, as they should, but also our small medium enterprises benefit. And so the protocol on women and youth in trade is in advanced stages of being negotiated, and it shall be concluded by June this year. Same thing with the protocol on digital trade. The cost of trade finance in Africa is a significant challenge. That is why we are accelerating our efforts to ensure that the appropriate support is provided to our commercial banks for onward lending at affordable rates to bring down the cost of trade finance in Africa. And here again, I hope that by the end of the year, we will have a solution that will provide an incentive to our commercial banks to lend to small medium enterprises that want to trade under the AFCFTA at much, much cheaper rates than we have seen in the past. Our colleague who presented the study preempted the statement that I was going to make on the export guarantee scheme. And again, as Afrexim Bank, Emeka mentioned, we are at advanced stages of negotiating a Continental export guarantee scheme under the rules of the AFCFTA to ensure that we have the appropriate risk mitigation tools to boost intra-Africa trade. And here again, by the end of the year, we will make an announcement on the implementation of this important tool for trade. It is already being piloted in COMESA, and we hope to extend it beyond COMESA to the rest of the continent. As I mentioned earlier, it is the private sector that trades, not bureaucrats, people like me, or a secretariat. It is the small medium enterprises, it is our corporations that trade. That is why we hosted the AFCFTA Business Forum last month to ensure that we create a platform for dialogue with the private sector in Africa, to enable the private sector to be the real drivers and the pillar of implementation of the AFCFTA. We shall convene this business forum yearly to ensure that in the implementation of the AFCFTA, we bring our private sector with us, and that the private sector continues to create opportunities in Africa. So let me leave you with the same thought that I left you with last year, which every year, in my view, becomes more and more and more relevant. And that is the projections by the World Bank that by the year 2035, where we implement this agreement with its challenges, by the year 2035, we have an opportunity to lift 100 million Africans out of moderate and abject poverty, to boost intra-Africa trade and double intra-Africa trade by that year, to contribute to Africa's GDP by over $450 billion through boosting intra-Africa trade, to close the gender salary gap by up to 11%, where we implement the protocol on women and youth in trade to enable women-led businesses to benefit from the AFCFTA. And then, of course, to ensure that by the year 2035, the productive capacity of Africa, focusing on value-added production in the areas that we discussed, in pharmaceuticals, in agriculture, in the automotive sector, in the component sector, that we boost the industrial base and the manufacturing capacity of Africa in the way that I saw this morning when I visited CIPLA. That's the compelling proposition of the AFCFTA. And we as Africans must seize this instrument with all of the challenges that will come. We must seize this as an opportunity to move away from being on the periphery of the global economy and to be an alternative center for value chains development and supply chain networks. That's what the AFCFTA enables us to be. So that when there is a geopolitical context in another part of the world, we have a supply chain network that leverages on the AFCFTA to enable our self-sufficiency as a continent to continue. So we're not talking just about the trade agreement. We are talking about intrinsically the development of our continent, learning from the lessons of this geopolitical context as well as the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm most grateful, Honorable Minister, to be back in Kampala to engage with the private sector so that together we can explore the opportunities and the challenges and tackle these challenges together and create opportunities together. I am also happy that that we brought Afreximbank with us, because we can reduce, eliminate barriers to trade all we want. We can bring down tariffs to zero immediately. But if there is no trade finance, if there is no finance to build infrastructure that supports trade, the 0% duty means nothing if those other related policy challenges are not addressed. And so the partnership with Afreximbank, with African Development Bank, and also with Africa Finance Corporation, these partnerships are critical as overall tools for implementation of the AFCFTA. So we will facilitate the return to Kampala, the return of Afreximbank, Africa Finance Corporation, African Development Bank, so that our institutions, our development institutions, can be at the fore of supporting implementation of the AFCFTA, so that I don't have to run to other centers of global capital around the world for implementation of the AFCFTA, so that if I have to run, I run to African capitals for implementation of the AFCFTA. And so we shall convene that session at the right time, and we will collaborate with UNDP, with the private sector, to make sure that we position the private sector, SMEs, not only in Uganda, but in the entire sub-region, to benefit from the AFCFTA. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again next year. Honorable Minister, I'm already inviting myself to come back in a year's time to assess and to take account of what we would have agreed here, to check the progress that we would have been making. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I believe I speak on all of our behalfs when I say, indeed, Your Excellency, sir, you're welcome to return to Uganda next year. Friends, we're now coming to the beginning of the end. We're pretty much coming to the end, actually, of this gathering. And allow me in a short while invite His Excellency Ambassador Philip Odida to just come and give us some remarks on behalf of the Foreign Affairs. And I'll indulge him to do us the honors also of inviting the State Minister for Cooperatives to then come and close the session. Allow me to advise us all that we'll also have a group photo once the Minister is done, and so I'll be inviting that high table to join us after this. For the rest of us, dinner is pretty much almost served, and from here we'll be ushering you upstairs to dinner where we can carry on with this discussion. Ambassador.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony. My name is Ambassador Philip Odida. I returned recently from New York, where I served as Deputy Permanent Representative, and a few weeks ago, I started at headquarters as the Acting Director, Regional International Political Affairs. I've been asked to represent the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, given the fact that none of our ministers or peers was able to attend this meeting. It's not my intention to stand between hungry delegates and a hearty meal, especially after a thorough conversation that we've had this afternoon. But allow me to do two things before I make my statement. One, I've never come across any diplomat that dispenses with protocol. So please indulge me as I insist in acknowledging the Secretary General of African Continental Free Trade Area, Your Excellency, Wamkele Mele. Thank you. And also the Honorable Minister for Trade and Cooperatives, Honorable Francis Mwebesa. The Honorable Minister of State in charge of cooperatives, Honorable Frederick Gume Gobi. Allow me to also acknowledge Her Excellency, the Resident of UNDP, Excellency Elsie Atafua, Her Excellency, the High Commissioner of South Africa, Madam Lulama Sinyama. You're most welcome. And also the wonderful trio that's been involved in this conversation, represented by the Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, represented by the President, Madam Olive Chigongo, the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, represented by its CEO, Mr. Stephen Asimwe, and the Uganda Manufacturers Association, represented here by its board members and the Mr. Richard Mubiru. Just secondly, just to mention a comment in this very important conversation, a question that relates to a bottleneck that affects the private sector, bearing in mind that we are largely SMEs. And it relates to the question of orientation and a question raised by our dear participant, the owner of Bella Wines. This is to do with the question of how we address the issue of competition vis-a-vis collaboration. If we are to take advantage of the markets that are beyond our borders, it's probably time for us to consider consolidating the skills that are available from amongst us in order to take advantage of the market. So that orientation is critically important. Allow me to go into the comments by my ministry. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and his entire delegation to Uganda, and thank you for gracing this important dialogue. I also want to thank the Uganda Manufacturers Association for presenting Uganda's position paper on the African Continental Free Trade Area on behalf of the Ugandan private sector. The theme of the presentations and the discussions that ensued reflect our vision and commitment as a country to fully participate in the implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, with the aim of boosting opportunities for trading amongst ourselves as African countries. We fully believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area, when fully implemented, will be the game changer for the African continent, leading us to realize part of the vision as contained in African Union's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. In the vision, Africa would be transformed into the global powerhouse of the future, in which the free movement of people, capital, goods, and services will result in significant increases in trade and investments among African countries, rising to unprecedented levels and in the strengthening of Africa's place in global trade. You will agree that it is easier to trade with the more integrated markets, such as found in China, India, the United States, Russia and Brazil, or Indonesia, because they each represent markets ranging between 150 million to 1.3 billion. On its part, the African Continental Free Trade Area represents a potential single market of 1.3 billion people in the continent. In this regard, allow me to recall a speech delivered to the United Nations General Assembly in 2016 by our President, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, under the theme, the Sustainable Development Goals, a universal push to transform our world. In this speech, while recognizing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and applauding the Secretary General for including energy issues on the list of SDGs, he, however, observed that the latter missed two critical bottlenecks, namely ideological disorientation and the lack of market integration. The African Continental Free Trade Area, when implemented, will present an opportunity to address bottlenecks negatively impacting on Africa's trade especially the matter of small internal markets, as pointed out by our president. I therefore take this opportunity to thank those who have participated in the discussions and presentations, and to congratulate the panelists who ably discussed the question of exploring opportunities within the African continent and free trade area in the context of the position paper of the private sector of Uganda. It would be remiss of me to leave the podium without thanking the UNDP for its collaboration with the Ugandan private sector in making this occasion a success. We do take note of your pertinent remarks regarding the defunding of the development budget, and this adds extra impetus to the objectives of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as already clarified, one of the major objectives of your Secretary General's visit to Uganda is to assess the level of Uganda's preparedness to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. It is our sincere hope that the information that has been shared in the course of today's presentations has contributed to a better understanding of where Uganda is and where she desires to be in implementing this crucial agreement. I'm sure you will leave with a positive impression of our state of readiness. In conclusion, I take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to all those who have been involved in making arrangements for this visit and are participating in implementing some of its activities, such as today's program. It's my hope that the remaining planned activities for the visit will be successfully concluded and that the visit achieves its intended objectives. It's now my pleasure and honor to invite the Minister of State in charge of cooperatives, Honorable Frederick Gobi-Gume, to formally close this private sector dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Your Excellency, Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, my senior colleague, Honorable Mwebesa, I will now not jargon into the protocol, but I will observe the protocol as it has been raised. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for participating actively in this dialogue. And I want to congratulate you for the views shared. On a special note, I would like to welcome and thank the Secretary General, most especially for showing interest in the private sector. And this augurs well with the government approach of putting the private sector at the forefront. We note, colleagues, that 2 ministers have attended this dialogue. And that is a message to all of you that we take keen interest and are ready to move together with you. You have raised many issues about interconnectivity in infrastructure, the need to develop and harness regional value chains, the need to provide financing to promote exports, the need for a clear communication and an intra-African trade through a wide African import substitution strategy that can develop Africa's industrialization strategy. We have noted issues raised on the non-tariff barriers. We have also noted issues raised in trade in services. We have also taken note of what we require the government to do, de-risking the export process, and also actively moving together with the private sector in this mission. Your contributions have been informative. The government does not take you for granted. We know that in the road to development, industrialization, job creation, the government does not do that, but the private sector. You are the people who invest. You are the people who pay taxes. You are the people who drive the economy. We respect you, and we shall always move together with you in the endeavor to develop developments and also develop the economy of this country. The government has taken note of this and many other strategic interventions. We have also taken note of the request for Exim Bank to come back here and give us a session. Our challenges are on the cost of money. So we welcome you back. We welcome you back here to give us an opportunity to interface with the private sector, and we see a way forward as early as you can. Ladies and gentlemen, they prepared me a long speech, but I was scared to read because once hit, twice shy. If I continued reading without looking at you, many of you would start disappearing one by one, and I would end up with only the hotel attendants. And that would not be good for me. We have had a long day, a long afternoon, and a brilliant discussion from the discussants. And we would like to thank UNDP for that giving heart and request you that we could have many more for us here. Thank you for visiting the factories. We are looking forward to seeing you in Jinja, in other places until you depart. Ladies and gentlemen, I now take the honor to close this dialogue and thank you for attending. Thank you very much. I think a round of applause for all of you for being able to attend. We apologize for going slightly ahead of schedule. But at this point in time, I'm going to indulge the high table to just come up front for an official photograph. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, our President, CEOs, please, if you could just come and ask the DJ just to give us some music. We have officially closed. Dinner is served. You should have received a coupon by now. The dinner will be served upstairs. You have two options. There is traffic jam outside and there is dinner inside. The choice is yours. Members, we'll have just the high table first, then we're going to invite a few of you others to join. Otherwise, the shot might be too wide. Be advised, we have exhibitors, and this would be the time to now go and have a look at what they have on display. Thank you so much. Can we have the other members joining the picture? Mr. Biaruhanga. David. I don't know if the shot is not too wide. So some of us will take one step down and the others can be a step higher, just to allow you all to fit. I see my friend from Bella Wine joining the photo. She hopes this will help her market more in other countries. She said all the people who can solve her problems are here. So she wants to have photographic evidence. The rest of you, please take the opportunity to go through the different exhibition points that we have. I see Texford, Uganda. I can see Pearl Dairy Farm, New Cafe, Jora Shoes, Gromo Seeds Limited, to mention but a few. Let's just take some time to see the products. Those might interest you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Well, check.